They called her barren, cursed, a failed Omega unworthy of breathing the same air as the fertile wolves who received blessings under the moon, while she stood there, dressed in white, like a sacrifice nobody wanted. Eleanor Vale had spent years swallowing that shame, letting it sit in her throat like broken glass. But shame has a limit, and tonight, when the Alpha King himself emerged from the shadows and stared at her like she was the only wolf alive in that sacred circle, something ancient and dangerous woke up between them. This is the story of a woman the world discarded and the king who refused to let her go. Stay until the end, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about power. And drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is watching. The frost bit deep that night, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache before your skin even registers the pain. Eleanor stood in the center of the sacred circle while the Ashthorn Pack elders moved through the ritual with the mechanical precision of people who had done this 1,000 times before. The burning sage made her eyes water. Or maybe that was just convenient timing. Around her, young Omegas knelt with their heads bowed, trembling with anticipation as the Pack priestess marked their foreheads with crimson blessings. Fertile, chosen, worthy of carrying the next generation. The words hung in the air like promises carved in stone. Eleanor received nothing. She had stopped expecting the blessing years ago, right around the time the whispers started following her through the village like stray dogs. Barren. The word itself felt like a disease, something that rotted you from the inside out until there was nothing left but the shape of a person. She kept her spine straight anyway. Let them see her standing. Let them see that humiliation had not bent her yet. The other Omegas rose with red-marked foreheads, glowing with pride and relief. Their families surged forward with embraces and tears. Eleanor's family stayed at the edge of the crowd, far enough away that nobody would mistake them for being associated with her failure. That was when the forest shifted. Everyone felt it at once. The air changed, thickened. Wolves stopped mid-conversation, their instincts screaming warnings their conscious minds had not caught up to yet. Even the priestess paused, her hand still hovering over the clay bowl of ceremonial paint. From the tree line, figures emerged. Royal guards. 20 of them, maybe more, dressed in black ceremonial armor with silver wolf insignias that caught the moonlight like knives. They moved in formation, a military precision that made the Ashthorn warriors look like children playing at war. And then he appeared. King Lucien Draven, the Alpha King of the 7 Dominion realms, walked into that clearing like he owned not just the land, but the air itself. Broad-shouldered, battle-scarred, wrapped in black armor that looked like it had been forged in the same fire that made his reputation. His presence did not fill the space. It devoured it. The crowd dropped to their knees so fast you would have thought someone fired a starting gun. Eleanor stayed standing, not out of defiance. Not entirely. She simply had not processed what was happening yet. Her brain was still stuck on the fact that the Alpha King, the man who ruled 7 territories with the kind of iron fist that made warlords weep, was standing in her pack's sacred circle during a fertility blessing ceremony. Lucien's eyes swept across the crowd and stopped on her. The world went silent. Not metaphorically. Literally. The wind died. The wolves stopped breathing. Even the fire in the ceremonial braziers seemed to freeze mid-flicker. He stared at her. She stared back. And something passed between them that had no name but felt older than language itself. Recognition. The kind that makes powerful men afraid because it threatens the empire they spent their lives building. One of the pack elders, a man named Garrett, who had made a career out of reminding Eleanor how worthless she was, finally found his voice. "Your Majesty, we did not know you were coming. If we had known, we would have prepared." "I am not here for ceremony." Lucien's voice cut through the air like a blade. Low, controlled. The kind of voice that did not need to be loud to make you understand that disobedience would cost you everything. He started walking toward Eleanor. The crowd parted like water. Nobody breathed. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell leather and smoke and something metallic that might have been blood, he studied her face with the intensity of a man solving a problem that had haunted him for years. "What is your name?" "Eleanor." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. That surprised her. Everything else about this moment felt like a fever dream, but her voice held. "Eleanor Vale." Lucien tilted his head slightly, the way a predator does when it realizes its prey is not running. You were not blessed tonight. It was not a question. Eleanor swallowed hard. No. Why? Because I'm Barren, Your Majesty. The words tasted like ash. She had said them so many times they should have lost their sting by now, but they never did. Every time she spoke that sentence out loud, it felt like admitting she had failed at the one thing Omegas were born to do. Lucien's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe. A recognition of a lie so well told it had become truth. Who told you that? Everyone. Eleanor's voice hardened without her permission. The healers, the elders, my own family. I have been tested, examined, prayed over, and blessed by every ritual this pack knows. The answer is always the same. Lucien turned toward the pack elders, and the temperature in the clearing dropped 10 degrees. You tested her? Garrett stepped forward, wringing his hands like a man trying to explain why the house burned down while he was holding the matches. Yes, Your Majesty, multiple times. The blood work, the lineage scans, the fertility rites. Everything confirmed. You are wrong. The two words landed like an execution order. Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. Lucien looked back at Eleanor, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter but somehow more dangerous. You are not Barren. You were hidden. Eleanor's heart stopped. The clearing erupted into chaos. Omegas gasped. Elders shouted denials. Wolves growled in confusion. But Eleanor could not hear any of it because her entire existence had just shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she was still trying to figure out which piece to pick up first. Hidden? Her voice came out as a whisper. Hidden by whom? Lucien's jaw tightened. That is what I intend to discover. He turned toward his guards and barked an order that made the royal soldiers snap to attention. Escort her to Moonvale Citadel. Now. The elders erupted in protest. Garrett practically threw himself in front of Eleanor, his face red with desperation. Your Majesty, you cannot just take one of our pack members without— Can I not? Lucien's voice dropped to a register that made grown men reconsider their life choices. Are you challenging the authority of the Alpha King? Garrett paled, his mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. No, Your Majesty, of course not. I only meant— Then step aside. The command was absolute. Garrett moved before his brain caught up with his legs. Two royal guards approached Eleanor. One of them, a female soldier with a scar across her jaw, spoke in a low voice that almost sounded kind. Come with us. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign. Eleanor had not felt safe in years. Maybe ever. She looked back at the crowd, at the pack that had raised her, humiliated her, discarded her. Her mother stood at the edge, tears streaming down her face but making no move to intervene. Her father would not even meet her eyes. Nobody fought for her. Nobody ever had. So Eleanor turned back to the guards and nodded once. I will go. The journey to Moonvale Citadel took 3 days on horseback, traveling through forests so dense the sunlight barely reached the ground. The royal guards did not speak to her except to offer water and food at regular intervals. Eleanor spent most of the ride trying to process what Lucien had said. Hidden. The word kept circling her mind like a vulture. Hidden by whom? And why? What possible reason would anyone have for convincing an entire pack that she was barren when she was not? Unless her bloodline carried something dangerous. Eleanor had heard stories as a child, whispered around fires when the adults thought the young ones were asleep. Stories about Omega bloodlines so powerful they threatened the balance of the Dominion itself. Lines that were hunted, erased, buried beneath centuries of lies. But those were just stories, right? On the third day, they crested a hill, and Moonvale Citadel rose before them like a monument to dominance itself. Marble towers pierced the clouds. Golden war banners danced over blood-stained stone courtyards. The fortress sprawled across the valley like a sleeping dragon, all sharp edges and brutal beauty. This was not a palace built for comfort. This was a statement carved in stone. We conquer, we rule, challenge us, and die. Eleanor's throat went dry. The guards led her through gates thick enough to withstand a siege, past courtyards where soldiers trained with the kind of precision that comes from knowing your life depends on being faster than the enemy. Servants stopped to stare at her. Nobles whispered behind jeweled fans. Who is she? Why is she here? Did the king bring her? Eleanor kept her head high. Let them stare. She had survived years of humiliation in Ashthorn. She could survive this. The guards brought her to the royal wing, a section of the citadel so opulent it made her stomach turn. Everything gleamed, gold, silver, marble, like the entire hallway had been dipped in wealth and left to dry. They stopped in front of a set of double doors carved with wolves in mid-hunt. These are your chambers. Eleanor blinked. My chambers? The female guard with the scar almost smiled. The king's orders. You will stay here until he summons you. The doors opened. Inside was a suite larger than her family's entire home in Ashthorn, a four-poster bed draped in silk, a bathroom with a tub big enough to drown in, windows that overlooked gardens so meticulously maintained they looked like paintings. Eleanor stood in the doorway, frozen. This is a mistake. The guard shook her head. The Alpha King does not make mistakes. She stepped back, and the doors closed with a soft click. Eleanor was alone. She walked slowly through the room, touching surfaces to confirm they were real. Silk sheets, velvet curtains, a vanity stocked with oils and perfume she could not pronounce. This was not a guest room. This was a message. You belong here now. Or maybe it was a different message. You are trapped here now. Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. What did Lucien want from her? Why bring her here, install her in the royal wing, treat her like she mattered? Hidden. The word came back. Hidden by whom? Hidden from what? A knock on the door made her jump. Come in. A servant entered, a young woman with kind eyes and hands that twisted nervously at her apron. Forgive the intrusion, miss. The king requests your presence in the rose garden at sunset. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. Did he say why? The servant shook her head. Only that you should come. When the servant left, Eleanor stood and walked to the window. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Sunset was less than an hour away. She looked down at herself, still wearing the plain white dress from the blessing ceremony, now stained with travel dust and sweat. Not exactly appropriate attire for meeting a king, but then again, Lucien had seen her at her lowest, standing in that sacred circle, marked as worthless by her own pack. If he wanted her dressed like a noble, he would have sent clothes. So Eleanor washed her face, braided her hair, and walked out the door. The rose garden sat at the heart of the citadel, surrounded by walls high enough to block out the world. Inside, the air smelled like flowers and earth and something darker underneath. Blood, maybe. Or memory. Lucien stood at the center, his back to her, staring at a fountain carved in the shape of wolves devouring a stag. He spoke without turning around. Do you know what this garden is? Eleanor stepped closer, her footsteps soft on the stone path. No, Your Majesty, this is where my mother died. The words hung in the air like a confession. Eleanor stopped walking. Lucien finally turned to face her. In the fading light, he looked older, tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. She was poisoned. Right here. 20 years ago. I was 12. Eleanor's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Lucien waved a hand, dismissing the sympathy. Do not be. She died because she was weak. She trusted the wrong people. In this kingdom, trust is a luxury that gets you killed. He started walking toward her, slow and deliberate. I did not bring you here to talk about my dead mother. Then why am I here? Because you are dangerous. Eleanor's breath caught. I do not understand. Lucien stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You belong to a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. The Lunar Omegas. Your ancestors were not breeders, Eleanor. They were kingmakers. They could heal mortal wounds, stabilize alpha bloodlines, prevent the primal madness that drives rulers into tyranny. Eleanor's mind reeled. That is impossible. Is it? Lucien reached out and lifted her hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle. Have you ever noticed that wounds heal faster when you tend them? That wolves calm in your presence? That water seems to respond to you in ways it should not? Eleanor's throat closed. Because yes, she had noticed. She had just assumed everyone experienced the world that way. Lucien's voice dropped to a near whisper. Your pack did not fail to recognize your power, Eleanor. They suppressed it. Someone paid them to hide you. To convince you that you were worthless so you would never discover what you are. Who? I do not know yet, but I will find out. He released her hand and stepped back. Until then, you will stay here, under my protection. Eleanor's mind spun. This was too much, too fast. 3 days ago, she was standing in a sacred circle being branded as Barren. Now she was in the Alpha King's private garden, being told she belonged to an extinct bloodline with powers that should not exist. What if you are wrong? Lucien's expression hardened. I am not. How can you be so sure? Because the moment I saw you, my wolf recognized yours. And my wolf has never been wrong about power. The words landed like a physical blow. Eleanor took a step back, her heart hammering. I need time to think. You have until morning. Lucien turned back toward the fountain, dismissing her without another word. Eleanor fled the garden, her mind a riot of fear and possibility. That night, alone in her chambers, she could not sleep. She kept replaying Lucien's words. Lunar Omega, Kingmaker, hidden. She walked to the window and stared out at the moonlit gardens below. And as she stood there, something stirred inside her. A warmth. A pull. The moon. It was calling to her. Without thinking, Eleanor left her chambers and followed the pull through silent hallways, down stone staircases, past sleeping guards. She moved like a woman in a trance, her feet carrying her towards something she did not understand but could not resist. She ended up at the edge of the citadel, where the manicured gardens gave way to wild forest. And there, hidden beneath ancient trees, she found the hot springs. Steam rose from the water like ghosts. The air smelled like minerals and earth. The moonlight turned everything silver. Eleanor stepped into the water fully clothed, not caring that her dress would be ruined. The heat sank into her bones, melting tension she had carried for years. And then she felt him. Lucien emerged from the shadows like he had been waiting for her. He wore only loose pants, his chest bare and covered in scars that told stories of battles survived. You felt it too. His voice was rough, almost accusing. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Lucien stepped into the water, moving toward her with the slow deliberation of a predator closing in. This bond, this pull, it is not chance, Eleanor. Lunar Omega's bond with Alpha Kings. It is written in our blood. Our wolves recognize each other even when we do not. Eleanor's heart raced. I did not ask for this. Neither did I. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. But ignoring it will not make it go away. Then what do we do? Lucien's jaw tightened. We survive. Together. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. I cannot protect you if you do not let me in. Eleanor's breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to not trust this man who held the power to destroy her completely. But another instinct, older and deeper, told her that running would kill her just as surely as staying might, so she leaned into his touch and whispered the words that would change everything. Then protect me. Lucien's control shattered. He kissed her like a man drowning, desperate and consuming. His hands tangled in her wet hair, pulling her closer as the water surged around them. Eleanor kissed him back with equal ferocity, years of loneliness and shame burning away under the heat of his touch. This was not gentle. This was survival. Two broken people clinging to each other in the dark, hoping that together they might be strong enough to face what was coming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien pressed his forehead against hers. There is no going back from this. Eleanor's voice shook but held steady. I know. What she did not know was that on the hill above the hot springs, hidden in the shadows, someone watched. Duchess Seraphine Voss stood motionless, her expression carved from ice and fury. She had spent 5 years positioning herself to become queen. 5 years of political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and carefully cultivated influence. And now some nobody Omega from a forgotten pack was wrapped in the Alpha King's arms like she belonged there. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists. This would not stand. If Lucien would not see reason, she would make him. And if the Omega had to disappear for that to happen? Well, the kingdom was full of accidents waiting to occur. Seraphine turned and melted back into the shadows, already planning. Below, In the hot springs, Eleanor shivered despite the heat. Something is wrong. Lucien went still, his alpha instincts flaring. What do you feel? Eleanor looked up toward the hill, her eyes searching the darkness. We are being watched. Lucien's entire body went rigid. His alpha instincts flared to life, sharp and predatory. He pulled Eleanor behind him in one fluid motion, his eyes scanning the darkness above the hot springs with the precision of a man who had survived 100 assassination attempts. How long have you felt it? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Just now. A coldness. Like something watching prey. Lucien's jaw clenched. He knew that feeling. Had felt it on battlefields, in throne rooms, during peace negotiations that were anything but peaceful. The sensation of being studied by someone calculating how to destroy you. We leave. Now. He gripped her wrist and pulled her from the water, moving with urgent efficiency. Eleanor stumbled, her wet dress clinging to her legs, but Lucien did not slow down. He led her through the forest with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing every inch of your territory. Your Majesty, what if it was not just anything? His voice cut through the air like a blade. Someone followed you here. Someone knew you would come. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Because he was right. She had not told anyone where she was going, had not even known herself until the pull of the moon became too strong to resist. Which meant whoever was watching had been tracking her movements, studying her patterns, waiting. By the time they reached the citadel's inner walls, Lucien's guards had already mobilized. The female soldier with the scar across her jaw appeared from the shadows, her hand on her sword. Your Majesty. We felt the disturbance. Lucien's eyes were ice. Double the guards on Lady Eleanor's chambers. No one enters without my explicit permission, and I want scouts sweeping the forest. Someone was on that ridge. Find them. The guards saluted and disappeared into the darkness, barking orders to the patrol units. Lucien turned back to Eleanor, and for the first time since she met him, she saw something close to fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for her. Listen to me very carefully. You do not leave your chambers without an armed escort. You do not trust anyone, not the servants, not the nobles, not even the guards, unless I personally assign them to you. Do you understand? Eleanor's throat tightened. You think someone wants to kill me? It was not a question. Lucien's silence was answer enough. I do not think. I know. The moment I declared you under my protection, you became a target. Every noble family in this kingdom wants influence over the throne, and the fastest way to hurt a king is to destroy what he protects. Eleanor's mind reeled. 3 days ago, she was invisible, worthless. Now she was apparently valuable enough to murder. The math was brutal. Lucien walked her back to her chambers himself, his hand never leaving the small of her back. Protective, possessive. The kind of touch that said mine even when words did not. When they reached her doors, he stopped and turned to face her fully. I need you to trust me. Eleanor met his eyes. Trust is earned, Your Majesty. Lucien's lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. Fair enough. Then let me start earning it. He leaned in, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate. No one will touch you while I am still breathing. That is a promise written in blood. Then he was gone, disappearing down the hallway with the silent efficiency of a man who had spent his life moving through dangerous spaces. Eleanor stood there, dripping water onto marble floors, her heart hammering against her ribs. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed every word. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of an execution. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the windows she had forgotten to close and the sound of urgent voices in the hallway outside her chambers. She sat up, disoriented, her body aching from the previous night's revelations. The dress she had worn into the hot springs lay in a soaked heap on the floor. She vaguely remembered stripping it off and collapsing into bed wearing nothing but her undergarments in exhaustion. The voices grew louder, angrier. Eleanor wrapped herself in a silk robe she found draped over a chair and cracked open the door. 4 guards stood in the hallway, blocking the path of a woman who looked like she had been carved from winter itself. Tall, elegant, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. Her dress was deep crimson, her dark hair swept into an intricate style that probably required an hour and 3 servants. Duchess Seraphine Voss, Eleanor recognized her from descriptions she had overheard during the journey to Moon Vale. Daughter of a warlord clan, rumored to be Lucien's future queen before Eleanor's unexpected arrival shattered those plans. Seraphine's voice was smooth as poisoned honey. I am simply requesting an audience with the king's guest. Surely that is not unreasonable. The guard captain, a man built like a stone wall, did not budge. The king's orders were explicit, Duchess. No visitors. Seraphine's smile did not reach her eyes. How fascinating. And what exactly does the Alpha King fear might happen during a simple conversation between two women? The guard said nothing. His face could have been carved from granite. Seraphine's gaze shifted, landing on Eleanor with the precision of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. Ah, the mystery woman herself. She stepped around the guards before they could stop her, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Forgive the intrusion. I simply wanted to welcome you properly to Moonvale Citadel. Eleanor's instincts screamed warnings, but she kept her voice steady. That is kind of you, Duchess. Seraphine's smile widened. Is it? I wonder. You see, kindness and curiosity often wear the same face. She tilted her head, studying Eleanor the way a scientist studies an interesting specimen. Tell me, how does a Barren Omega from a forgotten pack end up in the royal wing, installed in chambers adjacent to the Alpha King's private suite? The words landed like calculated blows. Barren. Forgotten. The insults wrapped in polite inquiry. Eleanor felt her spine straighten. Perhaps you should ask the king. Seraphine laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. Oh, I intend to. But I thought it might be enlightening to hear your perspective first. After all, women understand certain truths that men prefer to ignore. She stepped closer, dropping her voice to something conspiratorial. Power is not given, dear. It is taken, and held, and defended with teeth and claws. You might have caught the king's attention, but attention is fleeting, especially when the object of that attention cannot provide what a kingdom requires. Eleanor's hands clenched inside the robe's sleeves. And what does a kingdom require? Seraphine's eyes glittered. Heirs, alliances, stability, things a Barren Omega cannot deliver no matter how compelling she finds herself. The silence stretched between them like a blade waiting to fall. Eleanor spoke quietly but clearly. You do not know me, Duchess, and you certainly do not know what I can or cannot deliver. Seraphine's expression flickered, just for a moment. Surprise, calculation, reassessment. Then she smiled again, sweeter than before. You're right. I do not know you. Yet. But I will. She turned and glided back toward the guards, pausing at the doorway. A word of advice, since you are new to court life. Wolves do not share territory. And this citadel belongs to those of us who bled for it long before you arrived. Then she was gone, leaving nothing but the faint scent of expensive perfume and threats wrapped in silk. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. The guard captain's voice filtered through the wood. Are you well, my lady? Eleanor pressed her palm flat against the door. I am fine. Thank you. But she was not fine. Not even close. Because Seraphine's words had landed exactly where they were meant to. Barren. Forgotten. Cannot provide what a kingdom requires. Eleanor walked to the window and stared out at the sprawling citadel below. Somewhere in that maze of stone and ambition, Lucien was ruling a kingdom, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, holding power that men killed to possess. And she was supposed to stand beside him, a woman the world had spent years convincing was worthless. The mathematics were impossible. A knock on the door made her turn. Enter. A servant girl appeared, different from the one yesterday. This one was younger, nervous, her hands twisting at her apron. Forgive me, my lady. The king requests your presence in the council chamber within the hour. Eleanor's stomach clenched. The council chamber? Yes, my lady. He said to tell you that the advisors have questions. Of course they did. Eleanor dismissed this girl and turned back to the wardrobe someone had stocked while she slept. Dresses in jewel tones, fabrics she could not name, nothing like the simple clothes she had worn in Ashthorn. She chose a deep green dress that reminded her of the forests back home. Simple, unadorned. If she was going to face a room full of nobles interrogating her right to exist in this citadel, she would do it as herself. not dressed up as someone she was not. The council chamber sat at the heart of the Citadel's political wing. Eleanor could feel the weight of it before she even entered. Power radiated from that room like heat from a fire. The guards opened the doors, and she stepped inside. The chamber was circular, with a massive table carved from dark wood dominating the center. Around it sat 12 council members, each representing a different territory within the 7 dominions. They all turned to stare at her with the collective interest of predators evaluating prey. At the head of the table sat Lucien. He wore formal black robes embroidered with silver wolves. The crown on his head looked like it weighed more than bone could bear. When his eyes met hers, something flickered in them. Apology, maybe. Or warning. Lady Eleanor Vale. The voice came from a man seated to Lucien's right, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who had spent decades learning how to destroy opponents without ever raising his voice. I am Lord Castellan Thorn, head of the King's Advisory Council. We have asked you here today to address certain concerns regarding your sudden elevation within the royal court. Eleanor's throat was dry, but she kept her voice steady. What concerns? Thorn's smile was thin. Let us begin with the obvious. You are an Omega from a minor pack with no political connections, no notable bloodline, and no documented fertility. Yet within days of arriving at Moonvale Citadel, you have been installed in the royal wing and granted access typically reserved for high-ranking nobility. This has raised questions. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. What questions? Another council member spoke up. A woman with iron-gray hair and a face like carved stone. Questions about your intentions. Your influence over the king. Your suitability for any role within the crown's inner circle. The words were surgical, precise, designed to cut without appearing to draw blood. Eleanor looked at Lucien. He sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Was this a test? Was he allowing this to happen? Or was his silence proof that even kings had limits to what they could control? Thorn leaned forward. We have also received reports that you and the king were discovered alone together in the hot springs late last night, in what some might consider a compromising position. Eleanor's face burned, but she refused to look away. I was not aware that my movements required council approval. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Your movements do not. But the king's do. His Majesty carries responsibilities that extend far beyond personal preference. Every action he takes affects the stability of the realm. So, you think I am a threat to stability? I think you are an unknown variable in a kingdom that has no tolerance for uncertainty. Lucien's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Enough. The single word carried the weight of absolute authority. The council members went silent instantly. Lucien stood, and somehow the room felt smaller. Lady Eleanor is under my protection. Her presence here is not subject to council debate. If any of you have concerns about my judgment, speak them now, directly. To me. The silence was suffocating. Thorn cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, we serve only the crown. Our questions come from a place of loyalty, not doubt. Lucien's gaze could have cut stone. Then let me clarify the situation in terms that require no interpretation. Lady Eleanor belongs to a bloodline I'm investigating. Until that investigation concludes, she remains within these walls under royal protection. Anyone who threatens her, undermines her, or questions her place here will answer to me personally. He let those words hang in the air like a blade suspended by thread. Are we clear? The council members murmured assent, but Eleanor could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. This was not acceptance. This was strategic retreat. For now. Lucien turned to Eleanor. You are dismissed. It was not a suggestion. Eleanor nodded once and walked out, feeling 12 pairs of eyes boring into her back with every step. When the doors closed behind her, she leaned against the wall and exhaled shakily. The guard captain appeared beside her. That could have gone worse, my lady. Eleanor almost laughed. How? The guard's expression was grim. They could have called for your immediate removal from the citadel. Or worse, the fact that they did not means the king's authority still holds, barely. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She had been in Moonvale for less than 2 days, and already she was a political crisis waiting to detonate. The next week passed in a haze of tension and careful choreography. Eleanor remained in her chambers most days, venturing out only with armed escorts, and even then feeling like prey walking through a predator's den. Servants brought meals she barely touched. Nobles watched her with calculating eyes whenever she appeared in the hallways. And Lucien became a ghost. She saw him only in passing, always surrounded by advisors and guards, always moving toward some crisis or negotiation that demanded his attention. They had kissed in the hot springs. He had promised to protect her. But protection and presence were different things entirely. Eleanor was beginning to understand the brutal truth of power. A king belongs to his kingdom first. Everything else is secondary. On the 8th day, something changed. Eleanor woke to find a sealed letter on her bedside table. No servant had delivered it. No guard had seen anyone enter. But there it sat, unmarked except for a single crimson seal. She opened it with trembling hands. The message inside was written in elegant script. You are in danger, more than the king understands. Meet me in the East Garden at midnight if you want the truth about your bloodline. Come alone, or do not come at all. No signature, no indication of who sent it. Every instinct Eleanor possessed screamed that this was a trap. But another part of her, the part that had spent years starving for answers, wanted desperately to know what truth someone thought was worth risking a midnight meeting. She spent the day weighing options. Tell Lucien and watch him lock down the entire citadel, possibly driving whoever sent the letter into permanent hiding. Ignore it and wonder forever what truth had been dangled just out of reach, or go and accept the consequences. When midnight approached, Eleanor made her choice. She dressed in dark clothes borrowed from a servant's closet and slipped past the guards using a passage she had discovered during restless explorations of the wing. If there was one thing Eleanor had learned during years of being unwanted, it was how to move through spaces without being noticed. The East Garden sat on the far side of the citadel, accessible through a series of covered walkways that smelled like jasmine and secrets. Eleanor's heart hammered with every step. This was insane, reckless, exactly the kind of decision that got people killed in palaces like this one. But she kept walking. The garden itself was smaller than the others, enclosed by stone walls thick with climbing ivy. A fountain burbled softly in the center, and standing beside it, cloaked in shadow, was a figure Eleanor did not recognize. As she approached, the figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a woman, ancient. Her face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from surviving things that should have killed you. Her eyes were sharp and clear despite her age. You came. Good. Her voice was rough as gravel. Eleanor stopped several paces away, ready to run. Who are you? The woman smiled without warmth. I am the last person alive who knew your grandmother, and I am here to tell you that everything Lucien discovered about your bloodline is true. You are Lunar Omega, the last of your line. She paused, letting that sink in. But there is more. Truths the king does not know because the records were destroyed centuries ago. Your bloodline does not just stabilize Alpha Kings, it controls them. Eleanor's breath caught. What do you mean, controls them? The woman's eyes glittered in the darkness. A Lunar Omega bonded to an Alpha King holds his primal nature in check. Without that bond, Alpha rulers eventually succumb to the madness that comes with absolute power. They become tyrants, monsters, destroyers of kingdoms. She stepped closer. Lucien needs you, not as a companion, as an anchor. Without you, he will fall to the same madness that consumed his ancestors, and when he does, this entire dominion will burn. Eleanor's mind spun. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you have become. You are not his equal, girl. You are his lifeline, and that makes you the most powerful and most endangered woman in the 7 dominions. The woman turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The people who hid your bloodline, who convinced your pack you were Barren, they did it to protect you. But now that you have been discovered, they will come for you, not to hide you this time, to eliminate you before the prophecy completes itself. Eleanor's voice shook. What prophecy? The woman's smile was sad. The one that says a lunar queen will either save the Dominion or watch it collapse into civil war. And those who profit from chaos would very much prefer the latter. Then she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Eleanor alone with information that felt like a loaded weapon placed in untrained hands. Eleanor stood there, her mind racing through implications. If what the woman said was true, Eleanor was not just a political inconvenience. She was the linchpin holding Lucien's sanity in place. which meant his enemies had every reason to destroy her, and his allies had every reason to control her. She was not a person anymore. She was leverage. The sound of footsteps made her spin around. Lucien emerged from the darkness, his expression carved from fury and something close to betrayal. "I told you not to leave your chambers." His voice was quiet. Dangerously so. Eleanor's chin lifted. "Someone sent me a letter. I needed answers, so you walked into an obvious trap without telling anyone." Lucien closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "Do you understand how easy it would have been to kill you just now? One blade, one arrow, one moment of vulnerability. And you would be dead. I can take care of myself, can you?" Lucien's control finally cracked. He grabbed her shoulders, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point impossible to ignore. "You are not in Ashthorn anymore, Eleanor. This is not some backwater pack where the worst thing that happens is gossip and shame. This is the capital of the 7 dominions. People die here for possessing information, for inconveniencing the wrong noble, for existing in a way that threatens someone's ambition." His grip tightened slightly. "I have spent years learning how to survive in this place. Years. And you waltz into a midnight meeting like consequences are optional." Eleanor's eyes blazed. "I'm trying to understand what I am. That woman told me things you have not. Things I need to know if I am supposed to survive here." "What did she tell you?" "Everything." Eleanor pulled away from his grip. "That I am not just Lunar Omega. That I control you. That without me you will fall to madness. That people hid my bloodline to protect me, and now they want me dead to prevent some prophecy about civil war." She was breathing hard now, the words tumbling out. "So forgive me for seeking answers when the man who dragged me here has been too busy ruling a kingdom to explain what the hell I have become." Lucien went very still. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, raw. "You want to know why I have not told you everything? Because every truth I share puts you in more danger. Because the more you know, the more valuable you become to my enemies. Because I am trying to protect you from a system designed to devour anyone who shows weakness." He stepped closer again, his eyes searching hers. "And yes, I have been distant. Because standing close to you makes me want things a king cannot afford to want. It makes me selfish, reckless, weak." Eleanor's breath caught. Lucien's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You asked what happens when a king gets tired of fighting. The answer is he does not. He cannot. Because the moment he stops, everyone he is supposed to protect dies." His forehead touched hers. "But you make me want to stop, and that terrifies me more than any war ever has." Eleanor's hands came up to grip his wrists, holding him there. "Then let me stand beside you, not behind you, not as something fragile that needs protection, as an equal." Lucien's laugh was bitter. "There are no equals beside a throne, Eleanor, only targets." "Then make me a target." Her voice was fierce. "Stop treating me like glass about to shatter and start trusting that I can learn how to survive this." They stood there, locked in a standoff that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with 2 people trying to figure out how to save each other without destroying themselves. Finally, Lucien pulled back. "If I do this, if I teach you how this world works, you follow my lead. No more midnight meetings, no more wandering off alone, no more decisions made without thinking through every possible consequence." Eleanor nodded. "Agreed. And you tell me everything that woman said, every word, every implication, every threat." Eleanor met his eyes. "Only if you do the same. No more protecting me through silence. I need to know what we are facing." Lucien studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Deal." They walked back through the garden side by side, and for the first time since arriving at Moonvale Citadel, Eleanor felt like she might actually survive this. What she did not know was that from a balcony high above, Seraphine Voss watched their reconciliation with cold calculation. The Duchess turned to the man standing beside her in the shadows. "Accelerate the plan. The Omega is becoming too integrated. If we wait any longer, Lucien will be impossible to separate from her." The man nodded once. "And if she survives the attempt?" Seraphine's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then we make sure the king believes she orchestrated it herself. Paranoia is just as effective as poison, sometimes more so." She turned and disappeared into the citadel's dark corridors, already planning. Below, Eleanor shivered despite the warm night air. Something terrible was coming. She could feel it in her bones, and this time, no amount of protection would be enough. The first assassination attempt came 3 days later during the dawn council session. Eleanor had insisted on attending despite Lucien's warnings. If she was going to survive court politics, she needed to understand how power actually moved through the citadel. Sitting in chambers waiting to be protected was not survival. It was just slower death. The council chamber filled with the usual cast of predators dressed in silk and strategy. Lord Castellan Thorne took his seat with the precise movements of a man who had choreographed every gesture for maximum impact. Duchess Seraphine arrived last, her crimson dress a declaration of war wrapped in fabric. Lucien sat at the head of the table, and Eleanor took the seat he had arranged for her, directly to his left, a position that announced to everyone present exactly where she stood in the hierarchy. The meeting began with trade negotiations, tariffs, supply routes, the kind of bureaucratic maneuvering that could bore you to death before it killed you politically. Eleanor listened carefully, learning the rhythm of how these wolves circled each other with words instead of teeth. Then a servant entered with wine. This was standard protocol. Morning sessions always included refreshments. The servant moved around the table with practiced efficiency, filling goblets from an ornate silver pitcher. When he reached Eleanor, something flickered in his eyes. Brief, almost invisible. But Eleanor caught it because she had spent years watching for the moment people decided she was not worth their kindness. Recognition, and something else underneath it. Apology. The wine poured into her goblet with a soft splash. Dark red, almost black in the morning light filtering through the chamber windows. Eleanor stared at it. Every instinct she possessed screamed warnings she could not name. Lord Thorne raised his goblet in a perfunctory toast to continued prosperity. Around the table, council members lifted their wine in synchronized agreement. Eleanor's hand moved toward her goblet. Stopped. Moved again. Lucien's eyes were on the trade document spread before him, his attention consumed by numbers and political implications. Eleanor lifted the goblet to her lips. The scent hit her first. Wine. Oak. And underneath, something bitter that did not belong. Her hand froze. Time stretched into something thick and slow. She could hear her own heartbeat, the rustle of papers, the quiet breathing of 12 council members waiting for her to drink. She lowered the goblet without tasting it. Across the table, Seraphine's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Eleanor set the goblet down with careful precision and turned to Lucien. "Your Majesty, I need to speak with you, privately, now." Her voice was quiet, but carried enough edge that Lucien's head snapped up immediately. He read something in her expression that made him rise without question. "Council is suspended. 10 minutes." The room erupted in confused murmurs, but Lucien was already moving toward the private antechamber behind the throne. Eleanor followed, her legs shaking with adrenaline she refused to show. The moment the door closed behind them, Lucien turned on her. "What is wrong?" Eleanor's voice trembled despite her best efforts. "The wine. Something is in the wine." Lucien went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence. "Are you certain?" Eleanor nodded. "I could smell it. Bitter. Wrong. I think someone poisoned my goblet." Lucien's expression shifted into something cold and lethal. He moved to the door and barked an order to the guard outside. "Bring me the servant who poured the wine, and seal the council chamber. No one leaves." Then he turned back to Eleanor, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that felt like being X-rayed. "Did you drink any of it?" "No. You are certain?" "Yes." Lucien exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Someone just tried to kill you in front of the entire council. In my presence. That is not just bold. That is a declaration." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists to stop them from shaking. "A declaration of what? That my protection means nothing. That you are fair game regardless of where you stand or who stands beside you." He moved to the window, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. "This changes everything." Within the hour, the servant was found dead in the kitchen storage room. Throat cut. Efficient. Professional. The kind of death that said someone had paid well to ensure silence. The wine Eleanor had not drunk was tested by the royal physicians. Nightshade extract. Concentrated. Enough to kill within minutes and make it look like a seizure or heart failure. The council reconvened under armed guard, and Lucien stood before them with the controlled fury of a man holding a leash on something that wanted to tear the world apart. Someone in this citadel just attempted to assassinate Lady Eleanor during a council session. In this room. Under my protection. His voice was quiet. Deadly. That means one of three things. Either my authority has degraded to the point where assassins operate freely within these walls, or someone on this council sanctioned the attempt, or there is a conspiracy so well organized that it can reach into the heart of my government without detection. He let the implications settle like ash after fire. I will discover which, and when I do, the consequences will be absolute. Lord Thorne cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, perhaps the lady's presence at council sessions is premature. For her own safety. Her safety is not negotiable. Lucien's words cut through the suggestion like a blade through silk. What is negotiable is how many heads roll before this conspiracy collapses. I suggest those of you with information start considering whether loyalty to me is worth more than whatever you were promised by whoever orchestrated this. The room went silent. Seraphine spoke up, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. Your Majesty, no one here would dare threaten someone under royal protection. Perhaps the attempt came from outside the citadel, agents from rival territories. We have enemies. We have traitors. Lucien's eyes locked on Seraphine with predatory focus. And they will be found. The meeting ended with threats hanging in the air like executioner's rope. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She paced her chambers like a caged animal, her mind replaying the moment she had almost drunk poison in a room full of witnesses who would have watched her die and called it tragedy instead of murder. Someone knocked. Not the usual servant's timid tap. Something harder, more urgent. Eleanor opened the door to find a young guard she did not recognize. Message for you, my lady. From the king. He handed her a sealed letter and disappeared before she could ask questions. Eleanor broke the seal with shaking hands. The note inside was written in Lucien's handwriting. She had seen enough of his correspondence over the past weeks to recognize the sharp, efficient strokes. East Tower, midnight. Come alone. I have information about who tried to kill you. Eleanor stared at the words. Every lesson Lucien had taught her about survival screamed that this was wrong. He would never ask her to go anywhere alone. Not after this morning. Not after making a public declaration about her safety. But the handwriting was his, or a perfect forgery. Eleanor's hands trembled as she weighed options. Ignore it and potentially miss critical information. Tell the guards and risk alerting whoever sent this if it was a trap. Or go and face whatever waited in that tower. She looked at the clock. 11:30. 30 minutes to decide whether trust or paranoia would kill her faster. At 11:55, Eleanor made her choice. She dressed in dark clothes and slipped out using the servant passages she had mapped during sleepless nights. If this was a trap, she would spring it on her own terms. And if it was genuine, she would learn who wanted her dead badly enough to strike in the king's council chamber. The East Tower was old, part of the original citadel construction before the palace expanded into the sprawling fortress it had become. Stone stairs spiraled upward into darkness, and Eleanor climbed them with her heart hammering against her ribs. At the top, a door stood slightly ajar. Firelight flickered from inside. Eleanor pushed it open slowly. The room beyond was circular, lined with ancient books and maps. A fire crackled in the hearth, and standing beside it, silhouetted against the flames, was Lucien. Relief flooded through her so intensely it made her knees weak. You came. His voice sounded strange, strained. Eleanor stepped inside. Your message said you found information about the assassination attempt. Lucien turned to face her fully, and Eleanor's blood turned to ice. His expression was wrong, too controlled, too careful, like a man playing a role instead of being himself. I did find information. He moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. I found that you are far more dangerous than I realized. Eleanor's back hit the door. What are you talking about? Lucien's eyes were cold. The poison attempt. It was too convenient, too perfectly timed to make me paranoid, to isolate me from my counsel, to make me trust only you. His voice dropped to something harsh and accusatory. And then I learned something interesting. The servant who poured your wine, he had a sister who works in your chambers, who had access to your belongings, your correspondence. Eleanor's mind raced. I do not understand. The letters, Eleanor. The anonymous letters you have been receiving. The ones warning you about danger. The ones telling you to meet people in gardens and towers. He stepped closer. They were all sent from inside the citadel, by someone with access to the servant networks. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate you into looking like a victim while actually orchestrating the chaos around you. Eleanor's world tilted. You think I did this? You think I tried to poison myself? I think someone is using you, or you are using yourself. Either way, the result is the same. My council is fracturing, my authority is being questioned, and at the center of every crisis stands you. The words landed like physical blows. Eleanor's voice shook with fury and disbelief. I did not drink the poison. If I wanted to create chaos, why would I risk my own life? Lucien's expression did not change, because you knew I would stop you, because the entire performance was designed to make me more protective, more isolated, more dependent on you. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. I have seen this strategy before. Political operatives insert someone vulnerable into the king's inner circle, someone who appears to need protection. And while the king focuses all his resources on defending that person, the real attack comes from somewhere else entirely. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. Not just hurt, betrayal so deep it had no bottom. You think I am a political operative, a planted threat. I think you might not even know what you are. Lucien's voice was tired now, defeated. But I cannot take that risk, not with the stability of the realm at stake. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. Then what are you going to do? Exile me? Imprison me? Kill me yourself and save your enemies the trouble? Lucien finally met her eyes again, and what she saw there was worse than anger. Doubt. Complete. Absolute. Doubt. I am sending you to the northern fortress, under guard, until I can verify whether you are a victim or a weapon. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor's voice came out as a whisper. You promised to protect me. I am protecting my kingdom. And there it was. The truth underneath every promise a king makes. The realm comes first, always, no matter who burns in the process. Eleanor straightened her spine. She had been humiliated before, discarded before. But this was different. This was the man who had pulled her from nothing and promised she mattered, now throwing her away the moment trust became inconvenient. When she spoke again, her voice was steel wrapped in ice. Then do it. Send me away. Lock me up. Convince yourself that I am the threat instead of the woman who actually tried to kill me. She moved toward the door, her entire body vibrating with rage. But know this, Your Majesty. When you finally figure out who is really destroying you from the inside, I will not be there to help you survive it, because you just taught me the most valuable lesson this citadel has to offer. She paused at the doorway, her eyes burning. Trust is a luxury that gets you killed, and I will never make that mistake again. Then she was gone, leaving Lucien standing alone in the firelight with the bitter taste of doubt and something that felt dangerously close to regret. Eleanor was escorted to the northern fortress at dawn. No trial, no formal accusation, just armed guards and a carriage that might as well have been a cage. She watched Moonvale's citadel disappear behind her and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The scared Omega who arrived seeking answers was gone. What remained was harder, colder, forged in the specific heat that comes from being betrayed by the person you were foolish enough to trust. The northern fortress was exactly what it sounded like. Stone, isolation, guards who watched her like she might explode at any moment. She was given quarters that were technically comfortable but functionally a cell. Days bled into weeks, and Eleanor learned what it meant to be truly alone. No servants gossiping about court intrigue, no guards offering updates, no Lucien appearing with explanations or apologies. Just silence and stone and the slow, grinding realization that she had been sacrificed on the altar of political convenience. On the 14th day, something changed. A guard delivered a letter. Not from Lucien. From Lord Castellan Thorne. Eleanor opened it with hands that had learned to stop shaking. Lady Eleanor, I write to inform you that the conspiracy against the crown has been uncovered. Duchess Seraphine Voss orchestrated the assassination attempt against you as part of a broader plot to destabilize the king's authority and position herself as his necessary replacement. She has been arrested. The evidence is conclusive. You are hereby cleared of all suspicion and free to return to Moonvale Citadel at your earliest convenience. The king requests your immediate return. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Then she walked to the fireplace and burned it. Because here was the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It does not matter if the person who hurt you was wrong. It does not matter if they realize their mistake and want to fix it. What matters is that they showed you who they really are when pressure arrived. Lucien had chosen his throne over her, and Eleanor had finally learned the lesson she should have understood from the beginning. She was never going to be someone's equal in a kingdom built on hierarchy. She was always going to be a variable, a risk, something to be managed or eliminated depending on political convenience. The guard knocked again an hour later. "My lady, a carriage has been prepared for your return to the capital." Eleanor stood at the window, staring out at the frozen landscape beyond the fortress walls. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, empty. The tone of someone who had survived something that should have killed them and come out the other side fundamentally changed. "Tell the king I will return, but not to his citadel, and not to his protection." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "My lady, I do not understand." Eleanor turned to face him, and something in her eyes made the seasoned warrior take an involuntary step back. "Tell him I am coming back to finish what he started. He wanted to know if I was a victim or a weapon. He is about to find out exactly how dangerous a discarded Omega can become when she stops playing by rules designed to keep her powerless." The guard paled. "My lady, that sounds like treason?" Eleanor's smile was sharp as broken glass. "No. That sounds like survival. And if your king taught me anything during my time in his precious citadel, it is that survival is the only rule that actually matters." She walked past the guard, her decision made. "Prepare the carriage, but do not tell anyone I am coming. I want my return to be a surprise." The guard hesitated, clearly torn between orders, and whatever instinct was screaming that letting this woman return to the capital unsupervised was a catastrophically bad idea. Eleanor did not wait for his agreement. She simply walked out the door with the absolute confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose and therefore no reason to fear consequences anymore. Because here was the truth. Nobody tells you about breaking someone. Sometimes they do not collapse. Sometimes they become exactly what you accuse them of being. And sometimes the monster you create turns out to be far more dangerous than the threat you imagined. The carriage ride back to Moonvale took 4 days. Eleanor spent the time learning everything she could from the guards assigned to escort her. How power actually flowed through the 7 dominions, which noble houses were barely holding on to authority, which alliances were paper thin, which territories were one bad harvest away from rebellion. She asked questions with the precise focus of someone studying an enemy fortress before siege. And the guards, relieved that she was not angry at them personally, answered more freely than they probably should have. By the time the Citadel's towers appeared on the horizon, Eleanor had transformed herself from prisoner to strategist. She did not arrive at the main gates. Instead, she had the carriage stop at a lesser entrance used by merchants and supply wagons. She dismissed her escort and entered the Citadel alone, dressed in servant clothes borrowed from a woman at the last inn. Nobody recognized her. Why would they? The terrified Omega who had left was gone. What walked through those gates was something harder, sharper, capable of violence the old Eleanor would have recoiled from. She made her way through the citadel using servant passages and timing learned from weeks of careful observation before her exile. And she went directly to the one person who would understand exactly what she needed, the ancient woman from the East Garden. Eleanor found her in the lower archives, surrounded by texts so old they crumbled at the edges. The woman looked up as Eleanor entered, and something like satisfaction flickered across her weathered face. "You came back." Eleanor's voice was flat. "You knew I would." The woman smiled. "I hoped. The girl who left here would have run. But you're not her anymore, are you?" Eleanor sat down across from the ancient scholar without waiting for invitation. "You told me I was Lucien's anchor, that I controlled his primal nature. I need to know if that control works both ways." The woman's eyes sharpened. "What are you asking? Can I use the bond to hurt him? To make him feel what I felt when he threw me away like garbage?" The silence stretched long enough that Eleanor wondered if she had finally asked a question too dangerous to answer. Then the woman leaned forward. Yes, a Lunar Omega bonded to an Alpha King can destabilize him as easily as stabilize him. You could drive him toward madness instead of away from it, amplify his worst instincts, turn his strength into liability. She paused. But that power requires accepting the bond fully, claiming it instead of being claimed by it. And once you do that, there is no going back. You become as bound to him as he is to you. His pain becomes yours. His destruction becomes yours. Eleanor's jaw tightened. So I can hurt him, but only by hurting myself in the process. The woman nodded slowly. That is the price of power between bonded wolves. Connection cuts both ways. Eleanor stood, her decision crystallizing into something cold and absolute. Then I will pay it. Because he needs to understand that throwing people away has consequences. That treating someone as disposable does not mean they disappear. Sometimes it means they come back as exactly the nightmare you created. The woman watched her with ancient, knowing eyes. And what happens after? When you have made him feel your pain? When you have proven your point? Eleanor's smile was bitter. Then I leave, and he gets to spend the rest of his reign knowing that the one person who could have saved him chose not to. She walked toward the door, then paused. How do I claim the bond? The woman's voice followed her into the darkness. You already know. The hot springs. Where it began. Go there under the full moon, alone, and let the bond recognize what you have become. Eleanor disappeared into the citadel's shadows, and the ancient scholar sat back with a heavy sigh. Another queen choosing vengeance over wisdom. Another kingdom about to learn that hurt people, and power in the hands of the wounded is the most dangerous force in existence. She turned back to her crumbling texts, already knowing how this story would end. Not with healing, with fire. 3 nights later, the full moon rose over Moonvale Citadel like a silver eye judging everything beneath it. Eleanor stood at the edge of the hot springs, dressed in white like the sacrifice she had been that night in Ashthorn when everything started. But she was not a sacrifice anymore. She was something far more dangerous. A woman with power she finally understood, and rage she refused to bury. She stepped into the water and felt the bond wake up like a sleeping predator recognizing its other half. Miles away, in his private chambers, Lucien gasped as pain lanced through his chest. Not physical, deeper, like something fundamental was being torn apart from the inside. In the hot springs, Eleanor closed her eyes and let the lunar power surge through her veins. Let it recognize her, claim her, transform her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt powerful instead of powerless. When she opened her eyes again, they glowed silver in the moonlight. The bond was hers now, not his, and she was going to teach the Alpha King exactly what happened when you threw away the one thing keeping you sane. Lucien collapsed to his knees in the middle of his private chambers, gasping like a man who had just surfaced from drowning. Pain radiated through his chest in waves that had nothing to do with his physical body and everything to do with something fundamental being ripped apart at its core. The bond. Someone was manipulating the bond. His wolf howled inside his mind, thrashing against invisible chains that had not existed an hour ago. And underneath the pain, Lucien felt something worse than agony. Recognition. Eleanor. She was doing this. Somehow. She had claimed the bond and turned it into a weapon aimed directly at the parts of him he could not armor. Lucien dragged himself to his feet, sweat dripping down his face, his hands shaking with the effort of staying conscious. Every instinct in his body screamed to find her, to stop her, to make this pain end by any means necessary. But underneath those instincts, quieter and more dangerous, came understanding. This was what he had done to her, this tearing apart. This violation of trust so profound it rewrote the fundamental nature of connection itself. He had thrown her away, doubted her, sent her into exile while she was still reeling from an assassination attempt he should have prevented, and now she was showing him exactly what that betrayal felt like from the inside. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from realizing you have become the villain in someone else's story. Not through malice, through cowardice, through choosing fear over faith at the exact moment faith mattered most. Lucien had spent his entire reign making impossible choices, sacrificing pieces of his humanity on the altar of political necessity. But this was different. This was not strategy. This was cruelty born from his own inability to trust the one person who had given him everything and asked for nothing except to be believed. Lucien staggered to the window, his vision swimming. Below, the citadel sprawled in moonlit silence, unaware that their king was being systematically destroyed by the woman he had been too paranoid to protect. A knock on the door made him straighten through sheer force of will. Kings do not show weakness, even when weakness is the only honest thing left. Enter. The guard captain stepped inside and immediately went pale. Your Majesty, you are injured. I am fine. Lucien's voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by the effort of speaking through pain that had no physical source. What do you need? The captain hesitated, clearly weighing whether contradicting his king's obvious lie was worth the risk. Lady Eleanor has returned to the citadel. She was spotted entering through the merchant gate 2 hours ago. Lucien's blood turned to ice. The pain in his chest intensified, and he understood with sudden clarity that proximity mattered. The closer Eleanor got, the stronger her ability to manipulate the bond became. Where is she now? We do not know, Your Majesty. She dismissed her escort and disappeared into the servant corridors. We have been searching, but... Find her! The command cracked through the air like a whip. Mobilize every available guard. Search every room, every passage, every corner of this citadel. And when you find her, bring her to me, unharmed. Is that clear? The captain saluted and fled, clearly grateful to escape the suffocating tension radiating from his king. Lucien stood alone in his chambers, fighting to breathe through pain that was rewriting his nervous system. Eleanor was back. She had claimed the bond, and she was somewhere in this fortress using power she barely understood to punish him for sins he absolutely deserved. The question was what happened when punishment became the only language left between two people who had destroyed each other's capacity for trust. Lucien knew the answer. War. Eleanor walked through the citadel's shadowed corridors with the steady confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of this fortress during sleepless nights. The power thrumming through her veins felt intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She could feel Lucien on the other end of the bond, feel his pain, his confusion, his desperate need to find her and make this stop. Good. Let him feel helpless. Let him understand what it was like to be thrown away by the one person you trusted to stand beside you. The lunar energy coursing through her was not gentle. It was raw, primal. The kind of power that ancient texts warned about because it did not differentiate between justice and vengeance. Eleanor had spent her entire life being told she was powerless, barren, worthless, and now she held enough power in her hands to break a king. The temptation to use it fully was overwhelming. She moved deeper into the citadel's heart, heading toward the throne room. Not because she wanted an audience, because she wanted him to find her there, in the seat of his power, the place where he had made the choice to sacrifice her for political stability. She wanted him to see what that choice had created. People do not understand what powerlessness does to a person until they have lived inside it. It is not just absence, it is erosion. Every day you wake up knowing your voice does not matter. Your needs are secondary. Your existence is conditional on someone else's approval. That erosion hollows you out until you are not even sure who you would be if the weight was lifted. And then when power finally arrives, it does not feel like liberation. It feels like rage given form, like years of swallowed screams finally finding their way out. The throne room was empty at this hour. Just shadows and moonlight streaming through high windows that had witnessed centuries of kings making choices that determined whether kingdoms prospered or burned. Eleanor walked up the steps to the dais and stood before the massive chair carved from black stone and silver. This was what Lucien had chosen over her. This cold, brutal symbol of authority that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Eleanor placed her hand on the armrest and felt the bond flare brighter. Lucien was close now, coming fast. She could sense his approach like a storm gathering on the horizon. She turned to face the main doors and waited. They slammed open with enough force to crack stone. Lucien stood in the doorway, backlit by torches, his chest heaving. He looked like he had run through the entire citadel. His formal robes were gone, replaced by simple black clothing. No crown, no armor, just a man who had been broken down to his most essential parts. Eleanor. His voice was raw. Stop this. Whatever you are doing to the bond, stop it before you destroy us both. Eleanor's expression was carved from ice. Destroy us both? There is no us, Your Majesty. You made that clear when you sent me away like I was garbage you needed disposed of. Lucien took a step forward, then stopped as another wave of pain from the bond made him stagger. His hand went to his chest, fingers digging into the fabric over his heart, as if he could physically hold himself together. I was wrong. Seraphine orchestrated the entire conspiracy. The assassination attempt, the letters, the servant. All of it was designed to make me doubt you, and I fell for it because I have spent so long surviving through paranoia that I forgot how to trust. Eleanor's laugh was bitter and sharp enough to cut. You forgot how to trust? You are the Alpha King. You hold absolute power. I was the one with nothing. No family, no pack, no allies. And I still chose to trust you, even when every instinct told me I was walking into another trap. Her voice rose, echoing off the stone walls. But you? The moment trusting me became inconvenient, you threw me away. Not because you had proof I betrayed you, but because doubt was easier than courage. Lucien's jaw clenched. She could see the muscles working, the visible effort it took him to remain standing under the combined assault of physical pain and emotional devastation. You are right. I failed you. Completely. But destroying the bond will not fix what I broke. It will just ensure we both die slowly from a connection that has been poisoned beyond repair. Eleanor stepped down from the dais, moving toward him with predatory focus. The lunar energy made her movements fluid, almost inhuman. She could feel the power responding to her emotions, amplifying her anger into something that could reshape reality. Maybe that is exactly what we deserve. Two people so damaged by power that we destroyed the one thing that could have saved us. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough that he could see the silver glow in her eyes. Close enough that the bond between them crackled like lightning in the space separating their bodies. You wanted to know if I was a victim or a weapon. Here's your answer. I am both, and you made me this way. There is a particular kind of tragedy in watching someone become what you accuse them of being. Lucien had treated Eleanor like a threat, and in doing so, he had created the very danger he feared. Self-fulfilling prophecies are not just about prediction. They are about the violence we commit in the name of protection, about how fear becomes the architect of its own worst outcomes. Lucien's control finally cracked. The king who had maintained iron composure through wars and political assassinations, and the slow grind of ruling an empire that wanted to tear itself apart, finally broke under the weight of hurting the one person he had promised to protect. Then kill me if that is what you need. Use the bond to drive me into madness. Turn my strength against me. But know that when I fall, this entire kingdom falls with me. Not because I am irreplaceable, but because the power vacuum will trigger a civil war that will burn through the 7 dominions like wildfire. His voice dropped to something raw and broken. So go ahead. Take your revenge. But do not pretend it is justice when thousands of innocent people die because you chose pain over mercy. The words landed like physical blows. Eleanor's breath caught. Because he was right. She had been so consumed by her own hurt that she had not thought through the consequences. What happened to kingdoms when their rulers collapsed? How many people bled when power structures fractured? How many children would starve in the chaos? How many families would be destroyed? Her hands clenched into fists. You do not get to make me responsible for your failures. I am not the one who built a kingdom so fragile it cannot survive without a tyrant holding it together. I am not a tyrant. Lucien's voice was quiet but firm. I am a man trying to hold together an empire that wants to tear itself apart. And yes, I have made brutal choices. Sacrificed people who deserved better. Become someone I barely recognize in the mirror. But I did it because the alternative was chaos. Suffering. Death on a scale that makes individual pain look like mercy. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers with desperate intensity. You think I do not understand what I did to you? I live with it every moment, but if choosing between your pain and a civil war that kills thousands makes me a monster, then I am a monster. And I will carry that burden until it crushes me because someone has to. Eleanor's throat tightened. This was not the defensive king she expected. This was someone who understood exactly what he had done and had decided the math was worth it anyway. That made it worse somehow. Because at least anger at his ignorance was simple, clean, but this This was rage at someone who knew the cost and paid it anyway because he believed his kingdom mattered more than one person, more than her. Her voice shook. Then you and I have nothing more to say to each other, because I will never accept that my suffering was necessary for your political stability. I'm not asking you to accept it. Lucien's voice was tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. I am just asking you not to destroy yourself trying to destroy me, because that is what this power will do. The bond does not differentiate between his pain and yours. You hurt me, you hurt yourself. You drive me to madness, you follow me there. Eleanor's eyes blazed silver. Maybe madness is better than living in a world where love is always secondary to power. Lucien went very still. The kind of stillness that comes when something fundamental shifts inside a person's understanding of reality. Love. The word hung between them like something fragile and dangerous, like a grenade with the pin pulled, waiting to see who would be brave enough or foolish enough to catch it. Eleanor's breath caught. She had not meant to say it, had not meant to acknowledge that underneath the rage and betrayal, something softer still existed, something that made this hurt so much worse because you cannot truly destroy someone unless you cared about them first. Lucien's expression shifted into something complex and raw. You loved me. Past tense, Your Majesty. Eleanor's voice was ice wrapped around something molten underneath. Whatever I felt died the moment you chose your throne over me. Lucien closed the remaining distance between them in 2 strides. Before Eleanor could react, he gripped her shoulders with desperate intensity, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point impossible to ignore. Then let me be clear about something. I have never loved anything in my entire life. Not my crown, not my kingdom, not the power I spent years bleeding to maintain. Those things were survival. Duty, the weight I carried because someone had to. His voice dropped to something raw and unguarded. But you? You were the first time I wanted something that was not about survival. The first time I looked at another person and thought, maybe there is more to existence than just holding on until death finally takes me. Eleanor's breath hitched. She could feel his hand shaking against her shoulders, could see the naked vulnerability in his eyes. This was not the Alpha King. This was just Lucy. And stripped down, honest, terrifying in his openness. Lucien's grip tightened. And yes, I failed you. Spectacularly. I chose paranoia over trust and threw away the one genuine thing I have ever had. But do not stand here and tell me that what we had was just you loving me while I loved my throne. Because I loved you enough that losing you felt like losing my mind. And that terrified me so completely that I destroyed us trying to protect myself. Eleanor stared at him, her entire worldview fracturing under the weight of his confession. Because this changed nothing and everything simultaneously. He still hurt her, still betrayed her. But the why behind it suddenly had texture and complexity instead of simple cruelty. You loved me. Present tense, his forehead pressed against hers. I love you. Even now. Even though you are using the bond to punish me. Even though I have given you every reason to hate me. I love you enough that I would rather die by your hand than live in a world where you do not exist. Tears burned behind Eleanor's eyes, hot and unwanted. She had spent weeks building armor around her heart, convincing herself that what they had was just manipulation and political maneuvering. But armor is just another kind of cage, and sometimes the bars you build to keep pain out also trap you inside your own isolation. You do not get to say that. You do not get to make this harder by being honest now, when your honesty 3 weeks ago could have prevented all of this. I know. Lucien's voice broke on the words. I know, and I will spend whatever time I have left regretting it. But Eleanor, please, let go of the bond before it kills you. Whatever punishment you think I deserve, do not make yourself pay the price for delivering it. Eleanor pulled back, putting distance between them, even though every cell in her body screamed to close the gap. The lunar energy was still thrumming through her, but it felt different now. Less like power. More like a live wire she was gripping with bare hands, unable to let go without being destroyed by what she had summoned. I cannot. Her voice was barely a whisper. I cannot let go because if I do, I go back to being powerless. And I will never be powerless again. Not for you. Not for anyone. Lucien's expression shifted into something that looked like understanding and devastation mixed into one. Then we are both lost. The silence that followed was suffocating, Two people standing in the wreckage of what they had built, unable to move forward or back without destroying what remained. Before Eleanor could respond, the throne room doors burst open with explosive force. Guards poured in, weapons drawn, but they were not royal guards. Eleanor recognized the crimson insignias on their armor immediately. Voss family soldiers. At their head walked Duchess Seraphine, dressed for war in black leather armor that made her look like death wrapped in elegance. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. Her face was carved from cold determination. She looked like someone who had spent weeks planning this exact moment down to the smallest detail. How touching. Her voice dripped poison. The king and his whore finally admitting they love each other right before they die. It is almost poetic. Lucien spun around, his entire body shifting into combat readiness despite the pain radiating through the bond. The transformation was immediate. The vulnerable man confessing his love disappeared, replaced by the warrior king who had conquered territories and destroyed enemies. Seraphine, you were arrested. How did I escape? Seraphine's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I did not. I was released. By the council members who finally realized that a king compromised by an Omega cannot rule effectively. They made a choice, Your Majesty, your throne or your lover. She gestured to the soldiers surrounding them with casual confidence. They chose the throne. Lucien's expression went cold, the kind of cold that comes before violence, before calculated brutality delivered with surgical precision, treason. Every council member involved will hang. Will they? Seraphine tilted her head like a cat playing with prey it has already caught. Or will you be too dead to execute anyone? Because that is what happens next. You die. She dies. And I take the crown you were too weak to hold properly. She raised her hand, and the soldiers advanced in perfect formation, 20 of them, maybe more. Trained warriors with weapons designed to kill alphas specifically, silver-edged blades, wolfsbane-tipped arrows, the kind of arsenal that said this was not improvisation, this was planned execution. Lucien moved in front of Eleanor instinctively, shielding her with his body despite everything that had happened between them, despite the fact that she had spent the last hour trying to hurt him, despite the fact that trust between them had been shattered so completely it might never heal. Because some instincts run deeper than hurt. Some bonds matter more than betrayal. And Eleanor, who had spent the last hour trying to hurt him, found herself doing the same thing, protecting him. Her hand reached for the bond not to cause pain but to channel power, to give instead of take. Because love and hate are not opposites. They are different sides of the same coin, and when someone tries to destroy what is yours, even if you are furious at them, even if they hurt you worse than you thought possible, instinct kicks in harder than reason. Eleanor reached for the bond with purpose this time, not to manipulate, not to punish, to amplify. Lunar energy surged through the connection between them, flooding Lucy's body with power that multiplied his alpha strength to levels that should not be possible. His eyes blazed gold, bright enough to cast shadows. Seraphine's confident expression flickered, just for a moment. Doubt, fear, the sudden realization that she had miscalculated something fundamental. What? Lucien moved, not with the calculated precision of a trained warrior, with the primal violence of an alpha protecting his mate. Years of royal restraint burned away in an instant, leaving only the predator that civilization tries to cage. He tore through the first line of soldiers like they were paper, claws extended, fangs bared, every ounce of royal composure replaced by raw, savage efficiency. Blood sprayed, armor crumpled. Soldiers who had trained for years to kill alphas discovered that training means nothing when facing something that has transcended normal limitations. Eleanor stood at the center, channeling power through the bond with an intensity that made her entire body glow silver. She could feel his movements before he made them, anticipate his needs before he vocalized them. They were not fighting as two separate people anymore. They were a weapon forged from betrayal and love and desperation. The throne room became a slaughterhouse. Seraphine screamed orders, but her soldiers were already breaking, because you cannot train for fighting something that moves faster than your eyes can track and hits harder than physics should allow. You cannot prepare for facing a bonded pair who have stopped fighting each other and turned their combined fury on a common enemy. Within minutes, bodies littered the throne room floor. Blood stained the marble. The pristine seat of power transformed into evidence of what happens when you threaten people who have nothing left to lose except each other. Seraphine stood alone now, backing toward the doors, her confidence shattered into something approaching panic. Her carefully planned execution had collapsed into chaos. Her overwhelming numerical advantage had been obliterated by something she had not accounted for: connection. Lucien stalked toward her with predatory focus, blood dripping from his claws. His breathing was steady, controlled. The breathing of someone who has done this before and will do it again without hesitation. "You wanted my throne." His voice was barely human, more growl than speech. "Come take it." Seraphine's hand went to the dagger at her belt, but they both knew it was performance, desperation masquerading as defiance. But Eleanor saw the real threat before anyone else, saw the way Seraphine's eyes flicked toward something behind them, saw the minute shift in her posture that said this was not surrender, this was distraction. Archers, hidden in the gallery above. Eleanor's scream cut through the throne room like a knife through silk. "Lucien, down!" He dropped instantly. No hesitation, no questioning, pure trust overriding thought. Arrows whistled through the space where his head had been milliseconds before. Silver-tipped, wolfsbane laced, the kind of projectiles designed to kill even the strongest alpha with a single hit. Eleanor threw her hands up, and silver energy exploded from her palms. Not consciously, not planned, pure instinct channeling power she did not know she possessed. The arrows disintegrated mid-flight, burned away by lunar fire that should not exist outside of ancient texts. And the gallery collapsed. Stone crumbled, wood splintered, archers tumbled to the ground in a tangle of broken bodies and screaming metal. The entire upper structure of the throne room came down like the hand of something divine reaching through reality to reshape it. Silence crashed over the throne room like a wave after a storm. Eleanor stood there, breathing hard, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Silver energy still crackled around her fingers. The air smelled like ozone and burned stone and something older that had no name in modern language. Lucien rose slowly, his eyes locked on her with something that looked like awe mixed with fear. "What are you?" Eleanor's voice shook. "I do not know." But they both understood the truth underneath those 3 words. Eleanor was not just Lunar Omega. She was something the bloodline had not produced in centuries, maybe ever. The kind of power that ancient kings had gone to war to possess or destroy because neutrality was never an option. Seraphine used the distraction to bolt for the doors. Her armor clinked as she ran, abandoning strategy for pure survival instinct. But she did not make it far. Lord Castellan Thorne stepped into the doorway, flanked by royal guards. Real ones this time. Loyal ones wearing the king's colors and carrying expressions that said they understood exactly what had just transpired in this throne room. "Duchess Seraphine Voss, you are under arrest for high treason, attempted regicide, and conspiracy against the crown." His voice was cold as winter and twice as unforgiving. "This time, there will be no release. No political maneuvering, no council intervention, just execution. Public, absolute, final." Seraphine struggled as guards seized her arms, dragging her away from the doors and toward a fate she had tried to impose on others. Her screams echoed through the corridors, promising vengeance and curses, and all the impotent rage of someone who gambled everything and lost. The sound faded until distance finally swallowed it completely. Thorne turned to Lucien and Eleanor, his expression unreadable. The old man had served 4 kings, had witnessed coups and assassinations, and the slow grind of political machinery destroying lives for abstract concepts like stability and order. He had seen everything, except this. "Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor, the Council requests your immediate presence. There are matters that require discussion." Lucien's jaw tightened. Blood still dripped from his claws, his chest heaved with exertion. He looked like a man who had just fought a war and won, but lost something irreplaceable in the process. "What matters?" Thorne's gaze flicked between them, assessing, calculating, weighing outcomes against risks, against the brutal mathematics of power. Whether the kingdom can survive being ruled by a bonded pair whose power together appears to exceed anything in recorded history. Whether that is salvation or the beginning of tyranny, unlike anything we have seen. He paused, letting the implications settle like dust after collapse. "The council is divided?" Some believe you should both be removed from power. Others believe you are exactly what the kingdom needs to survive what is coming, but all agree that what just happened in this throne room changes everything. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Because he was right. They had just demonstrated power that rewrote the rules, power that made them something other than king and omega, something that kingdoms throughout history had feared enough to hunt into extinction, made them dangerous. Lucien reached for Eleanor's hand. She hesitated, staring at his blood-stained fingers, at the evidence of violence delivered in her defense. Then she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real, despite everything that remained broken between them. Tell the council we will address them in the morning. Lucien's voice carried absolute authority, the tone of someone who had just remembered he was king and kings do not negotiate timing. Tonight, Eleanor and I have more important matters to resolve. Thorne's expression flickered with something that might have been approval, or resignation, or the quiet acceptance of someone who understands that some forces cannot be controlled, only endured. As you wish, Your Majesty. He withdrew, taking the guards with him, and leaving Eleanor and Lucien alone in the blood-stained throne room where their entire future had just been decided by violence and trust delivered in the span of heartbeats. Lucien turned to face Eleanor fully, still holding her hand like it was the only anchor keeping him tethered to sanity. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. I know trust is not something I can demand after what I did. But Eleanor, I need you to hear this. He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. Blood smeared across her cheek, but neither of them cared. If the council decides we are too dangerous together, I will not fight them. I will step down from the throne, give up the crown, walk away from everything I spent my life building, because none of it matters if you are not beside me. Eleanor's breath caught. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. You would give up your kingdom? For you? Lucien's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, smearing blood and tears together, without hesitation. Because you were right earlier. I built a kingdom so fragile it could not survive without me forcing it together through sheer will and brutality. But maybe that means I built it wrong. Maybe what this realm needs is not a tyrant holding chaos at bay. Maybe it needs something better. His forehead touched hers, and she could feel him trembling. And maybe I need to learn how to be something other than a king carrying the weight of the world alone. Maybe I need to learn how to trust, how to share power, how to be human again instead of just a symbol people either worship or destroy. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall, because this was what she had wanted, what she had needed to hear. But wanting something and being ready to accept it are different things entirely. You hurt me. Worse than I thought anyone could hurt me. I know. I do not know if I can trust you again. I know. Lucien's voice was steady despite the pain carved into every line of his face. But I'm asking you to let me try to earn it back. Not because I deserve it, but because what we have is worth fighting for. Even if that fight takes the rest of our lives. Even if I spend every day proving I will not fail you again. Eleanor stared at him, her mind warring between self-preservation and the terrifying possibility that love might actually be worth the risk, that broken things could be rebuilt stronger than before if both people were willing to do the work. Finally, she spoke. If I stay, if I choose this, you do not get to make decisions about my safety without me ever again. We are partners, or we are nothing. Agreed. His answer came without hesitation. And if you ever send me away again, I will burn this entire citadel to the ground on my way out. Lucien's lips twitched despite everything. The ghost of a smile. The first genuine expression of something other than pain or violence she had seen from him in weeks. Noted. Eleanor's grip on his hand tightened. And you have to mean it. When you say I matter more than your crown, you have to actually mean it when tested. Not just in this moment when the alternative is losing everything. When the choice comes again, and it will, you have to choose me. Us, not the kingdom. Lucien pulled her fully against him, his arms wrapping around her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I mean it. Every word. Even if it costs me everything I have spent my life building. Even if the council removes me tomorrow. Even if choosing you means watching this kingdom burn. I will choose you, always. Eleanor let herself lean into his chest, exhausted and terrified, and still not entirely sure this was the right choice. But maybe right choices were not about certainty. Maybe they were about being willing to try again after everything shattered, about believing that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger if both people committed to the work instead of abandoning ship the moment storms arrived. They stood there in the destroyed throne room, two people who had torn each other apart trying to figure out how to become whole again. Blood cooled on stone. Bodies lay where they fell, and above them, through the shattered gallery, moonlight streamed down like a benediction or a warning. Outside the doors, footsteps approached. Multiple sets, heavy boots, the sound of armed soldiers moving with purpose. Lucien's body tensed immediately, his arms tightening around Eleanor protectively. The doors opened, but it was not enemies this time. The royal guard poured in, led by the female soldier with the scar across her jaw. Behind them came servants carrying medical supplies, cleaners with equipment to handle the aftermath, the machinery of the citadel mobilizing to erase evidence of what had just transpired. The guard captain approached Lucien and Eleanor, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor, the citadel is secure. All remaining Voss family soldiers have been apprehended. The council has been informed and will convene at dawn as requested." She hesitated. "There are also delegations arriving from the outer territories. Word of tonight's events has already spread. They are requesting immediate audience." Lucien's jaw tightened. Of course word had spread. Battles in throne rooms do not stay secret, and now every territory would be calculating how tonight's display of power affected their own political positioning. "Tell them they will wait." His voice carried absolute authority. "No audiences until the council meets, no exceptions." The captain saluted and withdrew to relay the orders. Lucien looked down at Eleanor, his expression softening. "Can you walk?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The lunar energy had drained from her body, leaving behind a hollowness that felt like being scraped clean from the inside. "I think so." Lucien kept his arm around her waist as they descended from the dais. Servants scattered out of their path. Guards fell into protective formation. The king and his lunar queen walking through the wreckage of attempted coup like they owned not just the citadel, but reality itself. They made it to the royal wing before Eleanor's legs finally gave out. Lucien caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms with the easy strength of someone accustomed to carrying weight others could not bear. "I have you." His voice was soft against her hair. "I have you, and I will not let go again." Eleanor's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion and emotional devastation finally overwhelming her ability to stay conscious. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Lucien's heartbeat. Steady, strong, the rhythm of survival against impossible odds. When Eleanor woke, dawn light was filtering through windows she did not recognize. She was in a bed softer than anything she had felt before. Clean sheets, the smell of lavender and something medicinal underneath. She sat up slowly, her body aching in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. "You are awake." Lucien's voice came from across the room. He sat in a chair beside the window, still wearing blood-stained clothes, looking like he had not slept. His eyes were shadowed, haunted, the look of someone keeping vigil over something precious they almost lost. "How long was I out?" 5 hours. The healer said your body needed time to recover from channeling that much lunar energy. They want to examine you when you are ready. Eleanor swung her legs out of bed and stood on shaking legs. "Where are we?" "My private chambers. I had you brought here after you collapsed. Figured you would rather wake up somewhere safe than in a guest room with guards you do not trust standing watch." Eleanor looked around. This was the heart of Lucien's personal space. Books, maps, a desk covered in correspondence. The intimate geography of a man's life laid bare. He had brought her into the one place kings traditionally kept private from everyone. The council. When do they meet? Within the hour. Lucien stood, moving toward her with cautious steps like he was afraid sudden movement might shatter the fragile peace between them. "Eleanor, whatever they decide today, I need you to know something. Last night changed me. Not just the battle. Everything. The way you protected me, even after what I did. The way you stood beside me when you had every reason to let me fall." He stopped in front of her, his eyes searching hers. "I have been alone my entire life. Even surrounded by people, I was alone. But with you, I am not. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I understand what that means. What you mean. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to say something profound, something that captured the complexity of what she felt. But all that came out was the truth. I am terrified. Of what? Of choosing you and having it destroy me. Of trusting you and discovering that fear always wins in the end. Of building something real only to watch it collapse the moment pressure arrives. Lucien took her hands in his. Then let us be terrified together. Let us build something knowing it might fail but trying anyway. Because the alternative is living half alive, too afraid of pain to risk joy. A knock on the door interrupted whatever Eleanor might have said next. Your Majesty, the council has convened. Lucien's expression hardened. We are coming. He looked back at Eleanor, something fierce and protective blazing in his eyes. Whatever happens in that council chamber, we face it together. Agreed? Eleanor squeezed his hands. Agreed. They walked toward the council chamber side by side, and Eleanor felt the weight of what was coming pressing down like a physical force. The council would judge them, would decide if their combined power was salvation or threat, would determine whether they ruled together or were separated to prevent them from becoming the very tyranny they had just defeated. The doors to the council chamber loomed ahead. Guards opened them simultaneously. Inside, 12 council members sat waiting. Their expressions ranged from fearful to calculating to openly hostile. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, the Alpha King's seat. Lucien and Eleanor entered together, and every eye in the room tracked their movements with predatory focus. Lord Castellan Thorn stood, his ancient face unreadable. Your Majesty. Lady Eleanor, this council has convened to address the events of last night and determine the path forward for the Seven Dominions. He paused, and in that pause, Eleanor heard everything that remained unspoken. Your fate will be decided here. Your power will be judged. And depending on how this conversation unfolds, you will either reshape this kingdom together or be torn apart to prevent you from destroying it. Lucien's hand tightened around Eleanor's. Then let us begin. The council chamber doors closed behind them with the finality of a tomb ceiling, and outside the citadel held its breath, waiting to see if dawn would bring a new age or the beginning of the end. The council chamber felt smaller than it had any right to be. 12 pairs of eyes tracked Eleanor and Lucien's entrance with the kind of focus that precedes either coronation or execution. The air was thick with tension and something else underneath. Fear, not of violence, of change so fundamental it could not be undone. Lord Castellan Thorn remained standing, his ancient hands resting on the table with the weight of someone who had watched kingdoms rise and fall and understood that history repeats because people never learn. Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor, before we begin, I must ask a question that will shape everything that follows. Lucien's voice was steady. Ask. Thorn's eyes moved between them with surgical precision. Do you believe your bond makes you stronger rulers or more dangerous tyrants? The silence that followed was absolute. Because this was not just a question, this was the question, the one that would determine whether they walked out of this chamber together or were separated by force to prevent them from becoming the very thing the kingdom feared most. Eleanor spoke before Lucien could answer. I believe our bond makes us human, and humanity is the only thing that prevents rulers from becoming monsters. A council member 3 seats down, a woman named Lady Miriam with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, leaned forward. Humanity did not prevent you from collapsing an entire gallery last night, from disintegrating arrows mid-flight, from demonstrating power that has not existed in recorded history. That is not humanity. That is divinity, or monstrosity. The line between the two is often invisible until it is too late. Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. You are right. I demonstrated power I barely understand, power that terrifies me as much as it terrifies you. But the difference between divinity and monstrosity is not the power itself, it is what you choose to do with it. Last night, I chose to protect, not to conquer, not to dominate, to stand beside someone I love and prevent him from being murdered by people who would rather see this kingdom burn than watch it change. Lucien's hand found hers under the table, their fingers intertwining with the kind of desperation that comes from knowing you might lose something before you fully understand what you have. Thorn's expression remained unreadable. And you, Your Majesty? What is your answer to my question? Lucien stood slowly, his presence filling the room, not through intimidation, but through the quiet authority of someone who had finally learned the difference between power and strength. I believe our bond makes me a better king than I have ever been. Not because it gives me more power, because it gives me something I lost years ago. Perspective. The ability to see beyond strategy and survival. To remember that kingdoms are not made of borders and armies. They are made of people. And people need leaders who understand suffering because they have suffered themselves. He paused, his jaw tight. I have spent my entire reign making brutal choices because I believed mercy was weakness and trust was suicide. And those choices kept the kingdom stable. But they also made me into someone I barely recognize. Someone capable of throwing away the one person who mattered because doubt felt safer than faith. His voice dropped to something raw. Eleanor does not make me weaker. She makes me remember what I'm supposed to be protecting. Not territory. Not power structures. The lives of people who deserve better than a king who sacrifices them on the altar of political convenience. A council member on the left, Lord Barren, a man known for his military background and absolute intolerance for sentimentality, spoke up. Pretty words, Your Majesty. But words do not govern kingdoms. Power does. And the power you demonstrated last night, combined with Lady Eleanor's lunar abilities, represents a concentration of force that could crush dissent without consequence. What prevents you from becoming the very tyrants you claim to oppose? Lucien's expression hardened. The same thing that prevented me from executing you 3 months ago when I discovered you were embezzling from the treasury. Choice. I could have killed you, should have by the laws you helped write, but I chose exile instead, gave you a chance to disappear quietly. And when you returned and begged for reinstatement, swearing loyalty, I chose to trust that fear of consequences would keep you honest. Barren's face went pale. That trust makes me weak in your eyes. But it is also what prevents me from becoming a tyrant. Because tyrants do not trust. They control. They dominate. They rule through fear alone. And I refuse to be that kind of king, even if it costs me everything. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Council members leaning toward each other, debating, calculating, weighing risks against outcomes. Eleanor watched them and understood with sudden clarity that this was not just about her and Lucien. This was about what kind of kingdom the 7 dominions would become. Whether they would evolve or calcify. Whether they would embrace change or cling to systems that had kept them stable but stagnant for generations. History teaches us that the most dangerous moments in any civilization come not from external threats, but from internal resistance to transformation. People cling to familiar tyranny over uncertain freedom because change requires courage, and courage is the rarest resource in any kingdom. The council members arguing before her were not evil. They were terrified. And terrified people make decisions based on survival instinct rather than wisdom. Thorn raised his hand and silence descended like a guillotine blade. The council has heard your arguments. We will now deliberate. Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor, you are dismissed until we reach a decision. Lucien's jaw clenched. How long? As long as it takes. You will be summoned when the verdict is ready. Eleanor felt Lucien's hand tighten around hers, his entire body radiating the tension of someone forcing himself not to fight when every instinct screams battle. Understood. They walked out of the council chamber together, and the doors closed behind them with the finality of a cell door locking. The hallway outside was empty except for guards who looked anywhere except directly at them. Eleanor could feel the uncertainty radiating from everyone. The king and his lunar queen had demonstrated power that rewrote the rules, and now the old guard was deciding whether that rewriting was revolution or apocalypse. Lucien led her to a private balcony overlooking the Citadel Gardens. Dawn had fully arrived, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Below, servants moved through their routines. Guards changed shifts. Life continued with the stubborn persistence of existence that refuses to pause for political crisis. They could exile us. Eleanor's voice was quiet. Send us away and install a new king, someone more controllable, someone who does not threaten the established order. Lucien stared at the gardens, his profile carved from exhaustion and determination. They could. Probably should, from their perspective. We represent everything they fear: change, unpredictability, power they cannot contain or manipulate. He turned to face her fully. Would you go? If they demanded exile? Eleanor considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, exile would have felt like mercy, escape from a fortress that wanted to destroy her. But now? Where would we go? Anywhere. The Northern Territories. Across the sea. Somewhere far enough from politics that we could just exist without being symbols or threats or leverage. His hand came up to cup her face. I meant what I said in there. I will give up the crown if that is what it takes to keep you safe. Keep us together. Eleanor leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. And what happens to the kingdom if you leave? Who takes the throne? Thorn? He is a good administrator, but he has no combat experience. The first territory that smells weakness will attack. Or they install some puppet king who can be controlled by the council, and we spend the next decade watching this realm tear itself apart in civil war. She opened her eyes. We cannot leave, Lucien, not because we want the power, because walking away would be just as destructive as the tyranny they fear we might become. Lucien's expression shifted into something that looked like pride mixed with resignation. You understand the trap now. The cage that comes with a crown. You cannot abdicate without blood, cannot retire without chaos. The throne does not just demand your life, it demands your death too, because stepping away creates a vacuum that gets filled by violence. Eleanor pulled back slightly, studying his face. So what do we do? Wait for them to decide our fate? Accept whatever verdict they hand down? Lucien's smile was bitter. We do what we have always done, survive, and try to make the cost of that survival worth paying. The waiting was excruciating. Hours bled into afternoon, servants brought food they did not eat, guards changed shifts 3 times, and still no summons came from the council chamber. Eleanor paced the balcony like a caged animal, her mind racing through scenarios. Exile, imprisonment, forced separation where Lucien remained king but she was sent away to some distant fortress, execution for one or both of them to eliminate the threat entirely. Every possibility felt like another version of the same nightmare. Lucien sat in silence, his eyes distant, clearly running his own calculations. How to protect her if the verdict went badly, how to minimize bloodshed, how to ensure the kingdom survived even if they did not. Eleanor stopped pacing and turned to him. If they separate us, I need you to promise me something. Lucien's attention snapped to her immediately. Anything. Do not start a civil war trying to get me back. Do not burn the kingdom down because they made you choose between your crown and your heart. Promise me that if it comes to that, you will let me go. Lucien stood, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. I cannot promise that. His voice was raw. Do not ask me to promise I will not fight for you. Do not ask me to just accept losing you because some council decided we are too dangerous together. I spent my entire life not fighting for anything except survival and duty. You are the first thing I have ever wanted to fight for because it matters. Because you matter. Eleanor's throat tightened. And what if fighting for me destroys everything you spent your life building? What if your love for me becomes the thing that tears this kingdom apart? Then we rebuild. Lucien's hands gripped her shoulders with desperate intensity. We rebuild something better. Something not held together by one man's exhaustion and brutality. Something that can survive without requiring constant sacrifice from whoever sits on the throne. Before Eleanor could respond, a guard appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, Lady Eleanor, the council has reached a verdict. You are summoned immediately. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment that would determine whether they had a future together or whether everything they had survived would be ripped apart by people who feared change more than they valued justice. Lucien took her hand and they walked back toward the council chamber together. Each step felt heavy. Final. Like walking toward an execution or a coronation and not knowing which until the blade fell or the crown settled. The doors opened. The council sat in the same positions, but their expressions had shifted. Some looked resigned, others determined, a few openly hostile. But Lord Castellan Thorn's face remained unreadable as carved stone. Lucien and Eleanor stood before them, hands clasped, waiting for judgment. Thorn stood slowly, his ancient bones protesting the movement. This council has deliberated for 6 hours. We have reviewed historical precedents, consulted legal scholars, debated the philosophical implications of concentrated power, and we have reached a decision. The pause felt infinite. Your Majesty. Lady Eleanor, this council has determined that your bond represents both the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity this kingdom has faced in 500 years. Therefore, we have decided to implement a solution that addresses both concerns. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Here it came. The compromise that would feel like punishment wrapped in political necessity. Thorn continued, "You will remain as Alpha King, Your Majesty, and Lady Eleanor will be formally recognized as Queen Consort with full authority in matters of internal governance, healing, and Omega welfare. Your bond will be acknowledged and protected under law." Relief started to flood through Eleanor, but Thorn's raised hand stopped it. However, there are conditions, non-negotiable conditions that must be met or this arrangement is void. Lucien's voice was steady. Name them. First, you will establish a council of checks, a body with the authority to challenge royal decrees if they determine those decrees constitute abuse of power. This council will include representatives from every territory and will have the power to call for a vote of no confidence if necessary. Eleanor's eyes widened. That was not just a condition. That was a fundamental restructuring of how the monarchy operated. Thorn's gaze was unrelenting. Second, Lady Eleanor will undergo formal training in statecraft, law, and the history of the Seven Dominions. She will be educated to the same standard as any ruler because her power demands equal knowledge. Ignorance combined with ability is how tyrants are born. Eleanor nodded slowly. That was fair. Brutal, but fair. Third, you will both submit to regular evaluations by independent healers to ensure the bond is not deteriorating into the kind of codependency that clouds judgment. Love is powerful, but rulers cannot afford to make decisions based solely on emotion. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Fourth, and this is non-negotiable, if at any point this council determines that your combined power poses an existential threat to the stability of the realm, you will voluntarily abdicate and accept exile. Not imprisonment, not execution. Exile with full honors and financial support, but you will go peacefully. The silence was suffocating. Eleanor understood immediately what they were asking. A sword hanging over their heads forever. The constant threat that one wrong move, one display of power deemed excessive, and they would lose everything. It was not trust. It was a leash dressed up as compromise. But it was also survival. A path forward that did not end in war or execution or forced separation. Lucien looked at Eleanor. She looked back. An entire conversation happened in that glance. Are you willing to live under constant scrutiny? Can you accept that we will never be fully free? Is this enough? Eleanor squeezed his hand once. He turned back to Thorn. We accept your conditions, all of them. And we will hold ourselves to standards higher than any council could impose because we understand what is at stake. Thorn's expression softened fractionally. The first hint of something other than stern judgment. Then by the authority vested in this council by 5 centuries of tradition and law, I hereby recognize Eleanor Vale as Queen Consort of the Seven Dominions. May your reign be marked not by the power you wield, but by the wisdom with which you wield it. The formal words hung in the air like a benediction and a warning combined. One by one, the council members stood and bowed. Not deeply, not with the full reverence typically shown to monarchs, but enough to signal acknowledgement, acceptance, conditional support. It was not everything Eleanor had hoped for, but it was more than she had expected. And sometimes survival is not about winning completely. It is about finding a way forward that does not require destroying yourself or everything you care about in the process. The council dismissed them, and Lucien and Eleanor walked out of that chamber as recognized rulers, not because they had conquered their opposition, because they had proven willing to accept limitations on their own power, had demonstrated that they understood the difference between strength and tyranny. Outside, the citadel had changed. Or maybe Eleanor had changed, and the citadel was just revealing what had always been there. Guards no longer looked at her with suspicion. Servants offered genuine smiles instead of fearful deference. The air itself felt different, lighter, like something that had been holding its breath for decades had finally exhaled. Lucien led her to the highest tower in the citadel, a place he said he came to think when the weight of ruling became too heavy to carry inside stone walls. From here, the entire capital spread out below them. Markets, homes, training grounds, the messy, beautiful complexity of thousands of lives intersecting. This is what we are fighting for. Lucien's voice was quiet. Not the throne, not power. Those people down there who just want to live without fear, who want their children to grow up in a kingdom that values them as more than soldiers or laborers or political leverage. Eleanor leaned against the parapet, watching smoke rise from cooking fires as families prepared evening meals. Do you think we can actually do this? Build something better? Lucien moved behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. I think we can try. And maybe trying is enough. Maybe the point is not building something perfect, but building something less terrible than what came before. Incremental progress over generations. Small victories that add up to transformation so slow nobody realizes it is happening until they look back and see how far they have come. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. That is not a very inspiring vision. His smile was tired but genuine. No, but it is honest. And honesty is what got us here, what kept us alive when lies would have been easier. So I will take honest and unglamorous over inspiring and false every time. Eleanor's hands came up to frame his face, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. I love you, even when I hated you, even when I wanted to destroy you. Underneath all of that, I loved you. And that terrified me more than anything else because loving someone gives them the power to hurt you in ways nothing else can. Lucien's eyes were bright with emotion he no longer tried to hide. I know. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I understand what a gift that is. What a responsibility. Your love is not something I get to take for granted or weaponize or hide behind when convenient. It is something I have to earn every single day. He leaned his forehead against hers. And some days I will fail. Some days I will choose wrong or let fear make me stupid. But I promise you this. I will never stop trying, will never stop fighting to be worthy of standing beside you. Eleanor's voice broke on her next words. That is all I ever wanted. Not perfection, just effort, just someone willing to do the work even when it is hard. They kissed there on the tower as the sun set over the 7 dominions. And it was not the desperate passion of their first kiss in the hot springs. It was something quieter, deeper. The kiss of two people who had been through hell and chosen each other anyway. Who understood that love is not about grand gestures. It is about showing up consistently, even when everything inside you wants to run. The weeks that followed were brutal in ways Eleanor had not anticipated. Not because of external threats, because of the grinding work of actually governing, learning law, understanding treaties, memorizing the political relationships between territories that had been feuding for generations. Thorne assigned her tutors who did not coddle or make exceptions. They taught her the way they would teach any future ruler, with brutal honesty and zero tolerance for ignorance. Eleanor discovered she had a gift for internal governance, for understanding the human side of policy, how laws that looked reasonable on paper could destroy lives in practice, how sometimes mercy was more politically effective than punishment because people remembered kindness longer than they remembered fear. Lucien watched her grow into her role with something approaching awe. This was not the frightened Omega who had arrived at his citadel weeks ago. This was a queen learning how to wield power with precision instead of rage, how to balance compassion with necessity, how to be strong without becoming brutal. They established the Council of Checks as promised, appointed representatives from every territory, gave them real authority to challenge royal decisions. And within the first month, that council challenged 3 of Lucien's decrees, forced him to reconsider, to negotiate, to compromise. It was uncomfortable, frustrating. Everything in him rebelled against having his authority questioned. But it also worked. Policies improved when filtered through multiple perspectives. Fewer unintended consequences. Less abuse. More voices heard. Slowly, grudgingly, Lucien learned that sharing power did not make him weaker. It made the kingdom stronger. 3 months after Eleanor's coronation as queen consort, the Citadel healers confirmed what Eleanor had suspected for weeks. She was pregnant, not with one child, with twins, the prophecy that ancient texts had warned about. Twin heirs born from a lunar queen who would either unite the 7 dominions or burn them to ash beneath a war greater than history itself. When the healers delivered the news, Eleanor sat in stunned silence. Lucien gripped her hand so tightly she thought bones might break. This changes everything. His voice was rough with emotion Eleanor could not quite identify. Fear, joy, terror, all mixed together into something that had no name. Eleanor's free hand moved to her stomach, still flat, but carrying the future of an entire realm. Do we tell the council? Lucien's jaw tightened. We have to. They will find out eventually. Better to control the narrative than let rumors do it for us. Eleanor nodded, her mind already racing through implications. Some territories would see this as validation, proof that the bond was legitimate and blessed. Others would see it as the beginning of a dynasty too powerful to challenge, and some would see it as the fulfillment of prophecy that promised destruction. They announced it formally 2 days later in front of the full council and representatives from every territory. The reaction was explosive. Some territories celebrated. Others demanded immediate action to prevent the prophecy from manifesting. A few called for Eleanor's exile before the children were born, arguing that removing her now would prevent whatever catastrophe the ancient texts predicted. Lord Castellan Thorne let the chaos continue for 10 minutes before raising his hand for silence. The prophecy is clear. Twin heirs born from a lunar queen will either save the Dominion or destroy it. What the prophecy does not say is which outcome is predetermined. It offers choice, and choice means we have agency in how this unfolds. He looked at Lucien and Eleanor with something approaching grandfatherly sternness. You have spent 3 months proving you can rule with wisdom instead of power alone. Now you will spend the next 6 months proving you can prepare for the future those children represent, not by hoarding power, by distributing it, by ensuring that no matter what gifts those children inherit, they will be raised to serve rather than dominate. Eleanor stood, her voice clear and steady. We will, and we will do it publicly. Every decision, every policy, every choice we make regarding their upbringing will be transparent, because the only way to prevent the dark version of that prophecy is to raise children who understand that power is responsibility, not privilege. The council debated for hours, but ultimately, they agreed. The twins would be allowed to be born, but their education, their upbringing, their introduction to power would all be subject to council oversight. It was not ideal, but it was survival. And Eleanor was learning that sometimes survival is the victory. The pregnancy was difficult. Eleanor's body struggled with the dual demands of carrying twins and maintaining the lunar bond that kept Lucien stable. There were nights she collapsed from exhaustion, mornings she could not keep food down, weeks where healers worried she would not make it to full term. But she endured, because the alternative was watching everything they had built collapse. Lucien became impossibly protective, insufferably hovering. Eleanor loved and hated it in equal measure, but she understood. He had lost so much in his life. The thought of losing her or the children made him irrational. On the worst nights, when Eleanor's body was racked with pain and the healers looked grim, Lucien would lie beside her and whisper stories, not about kingdoms or power, about the future, about taking their children to the forests, teaching them to swim in hidden lakes, showing them that there was more to life than politics and survival. Those stories kept Eleanor alive when her body wanted to quit. 7 months into the pregnancy, rebellion erupted in the eastern territories. Not against Lucien specifically, against the prophecy, against the idea that twin heirs would reshape the Dominion. The rebels were well-funded, well-organized, and they moved fast, taking 3 cities before the royal army could respond. Lucien wanted to lead the campaign personally. Eleanor refused to let him go. You are not leaving me when I am 7 months pregnant with twins who are apparently prophesied to either save or destroy the kingdom. Send your generals, send your armies, but you stay here. Lucien's frustration was palpable. Those are my people dying out there, my responsibility. And these are our children, also your responsibility. You do not get to choose which duty matters more. You have to figure out how to fulfill both. It was the first real fight they had since her coronation. Brutal, honest. 2 strong-willed people who loved each other but disagreed fundamentally about how to protect what they had built. In the end, they compromised. Lucien sent his best general to lead the military response. But he also sent Eleanor's head diplomat to negotiate, to offer the rebels a voice in governance instead of just crushing them militarily. It took 6 weeks. But the rebellion ended not with bloodshed, but with concessions. Reforms. More representation for the Eastern Territories. Recognition that their grievances were legitimate even if their methods were not. The kingdom learned an important lesson. Force alone does not create stability. Sometimes you have to address the reasons people rebel instead of just punishing the rebellion. When Eleanor went into labor, it was 3 weeks early and in the middle of a diplomatic summit with foreign dignitaries. The contractions hit during a formal dinner. Eleanor gripped the table, her face going white, and every diplomat in the room froze. Lucien was beside her in seconds, his hand supporting her lower back. Healers, now. Guards scattered, servants mobilized. The entire citadel shifted into crisis mode. Eleanor was carried to the royal chambers where healers had been preparing for weeks. The labor was long, brutal. There were moments the healers thought they would lose her. Moments Lucien stood outside the doors listening to her scream and feeling utterly powerless. But Eleanor had survived too much to die in childbirth. She had endured assassination attempts and betrayal and exile and the grinding weight of learning to rule an empire. She would survive this too. 18 hours after labor began, the first child was born. A girl, small but fierce, with silver eyes that glowed in the dim light. The healers cleaned her quickly and handed her to Eleanor, who held her daughter with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face. 10 minutes later, the second child arrived. A boy, larger than his sister, with eyes that shifted between gold and silver depending on the light. Lucien held his son and felt something inside him crack open. Not break. Open. Like a door he had kept locked his entire life, suddenly swinging wide to reveal rooms he did not know existed. These were not symbols, not prophecy, not political leverage. These were his children. Tiny. Vulnerable. Entirely dependent on him and Eleanor to protect them, and teach them, and somehow prepare them for a future nobody could predict. Eleanor looked at Lucien holding their son, and she saw the exhausted man underneath the crown. The father. The husband. The person he had been before duty and survival made him into someone harder. What do we name them? Lucien's voice was rough with emotion. Eleanor looked down at her daughter, who stared back with unnerving focus for someone barely 20 minutes old. Lyra, for the constellation, because she will light the darkness. Lucien smiled, looking at his son. And Rowan, for the tree that bends but never breaks. Perfect names for children who would carry the weight of prophecy whether they wanted to or not. The kingdom celebrated the birth for 3 days. Streets filled with festivals. Markets gave away food. Every territory sent gifts and representatives to pay respects. But Eleanor and Lucien barely noticed. They were too consumed with the reality of being parents, the endless feeding, the sleepless nights, the terrifying responsibility of keeping 2 tiny humans alive. On the 4th night, when both children were finally asleep and the citadel had quieted, Eleanor and Lucien sat together in the darkness of their chambers. Do you think they will hate us for bringing them into this? Eleanor's voice was quiet. For making them carry prophecy and expectation and the weight of an entire kingdom before they can even walk? Lucien's arm tightened around her shoulders. Maybe. Probably. But hopefully they will also understand that we did everything in our power to prepare a world worthy of them. That we bled and fought and compromised and changed so they could inherit something better than what we were given. Eleanor leaned into him, exhausted beyond words. And if they still choose to burn it all down, then we will love them anyway. Because that is what parents do. Love their children even when those children disappoint them, even when they make different choices, even when they become people we never expected. Eleanor's eyes drifted closed. That is terrifying. Yes, Lucien's voice was soft. Yes, it is. The twins grew faster than seemed possible. Within months, they were crawling. Within a year, walking. And with mobility came the awakening of their powers. Lyra could heal with touch. Small things at first. Scraped knees, bruised elbows. But as she aged, her abilities grew. She could sense pain in others, feel suffering like it was her own. Rowan had his father's alpha strength, but amplified through Eleanor's lunar bloodline. By age 2, he could bend metal bars. By 3, he was sparring with guards who looked terrified of accidentally hurting the air. The council watched their development with mixture of awe and fear. These children were not normal, not even close. They were exactly what the prophecy had warned about, powerful beyond measure, capable of reshaping reality itself if they chose. But they were also kind, compassionate, children who cried when others hurt and helped without being asked and apologized when they made mistakes. Eleanor and Lucien raised them intentionally, not to wield power, to serve with it. Every lesson was designed to instill responsibility before strength, empathy before action. On Lyra's 5th birthday, she asked Eleanor a question that would stay with the queen for the rest of her life. "Mama, why do people call me prophecy child?" Eleanor knelt to her daughter's eye level, choosing words carefully. "Because people believe you and your brother will change the world, either by making it better or worse. But the truth is, every person changes the world. Every choice matters. You just might change it more visibly because of what you can do." She took her daughter's small hands. "But you get to decide how. Nobody else. Not the prophecy, not the council, not even your father and me. You get to choose what kind of person you become." Lyra's silver eyes were solemn. "What if I choose wrong?" "Then you try again. Make different choices. Learn. Grow. That is what being human means. Making mistakes and deciding to be better afterward." Years passed. The twins turned 7, then 10, then 13, and with each passing year their powers grew, became more refined, more dangerous. The council remained vigilant, watching for signs of corruption, of power overriding compassion, of the dark prophecy manifesting. But it never came, because Eleanor and Lucien had learned something that previous rulers had not. Power does not corrupt inevitably. It corrupts when left unchecked, when isolated, when combined with the belief that might makes right. But when power is taught as responsibility, when it is paired with empathy and subjected to constant accountability, it becomes something different, a tool, not an identity. On the 20th anniversary of Eleanor's arrival at Moonvale Citadel, the kingdom held a ceremony. Not to celebrate the monarchy, to celebrate transformation. 20 years of incremental change that had reshaped how the 7 dominions governed themselves. The Council of Checks had evolved into a representative body with real power. Territories that had spent centuries at war were negotiating instead of fighting. Omegas had legal protections they had never possessed before, and the monarchy itself had transformed from absolute authority into something more collaborative. It was not perfect. Far from it. There were still injustices, still suffering, still work to be done. But it was better, measurably better. And that was enough. Eleanor stood on the same balcony where she and Lucien had waited for the council's verdict 20 years earlier. The view had not changed, but everything else had. Lucien joined her, his hair now streaked with silver, his face lined with the evidence of 2 decades spent trying to be a better king than he had been raised to become. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. The assassination attempts, the betrayal, the exile, the brutal work of learning to rule, the pregnancy that almost killed her, the endless scrutiny and pressure and weight of responsibility. No. Her voice was certain. "I do not regret any of it, because all of it made me who I am, and I like who I have become." She turned to face him. "Do you?" Lucien's smile was soft, genuine. The smile of a man who had finally found peace after decades of war with himself. "I regret hurting you. Will regret that until my last breath. But everything else? Everything we built together? No, I would not change any of it." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with the comfortable familiarity of 20 years together. "You saved me, Eleanor. Not from Seraphine, not from conspiracy, from myself, from becoming the monster I was terrified I would become. You showed me that strength is not about dominating. It is about enduring, about choosing love even when fear feels safer." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, the rhythm that had anchored her through everything. Below them, the citadel prepared for evening. Guards changed shifts, families gathered for meals. Children played in streets that had once been battlegrounds. Life continued with the stubborn persistence of existence that refuses to yield to chaos. And in a private garden, Lyra and Rowan practiced their abilities under the watchful eyes of their tutors. 2 children who carried prophecy like a birthright, but chose compassion over conquest every single day. The future was uncertain, always would be. There would be new challenges, new threats, new crises that tested whether everything they had built could survive. But Eleanor had learned something during her years as queen. Certainty is not the goal. Resilience is. The ability to break and rebuild, to fail and try again. To survive not through perfection, but through persistent effort. That night, as Eleanor and Lucien lay in bed with moonlight streaming through windows that had witnessed 2 decades of transformation, Eleanor spoke the truth she had learned through pain and triumph combined. We did not build something perfect, but we built something honest. Something that acknowledged its own capacity for failure and created systems to catch itself before falling. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that is what legacy actually means. Not leaving behind a perfect world, leaving behind a world that knows how to fix itself when things break. Lucien's hand found hers in the darkness. I love you. More now than the day we met. More than yesterday. More than I thought possible. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I love you too. Even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard, because easy love is not real love. Real love is choosing each other when every instinct says run. When trust has been broken and needs to be rebuilt. When the easier path is walking away. They fell asleep like that. 2 people who had torn each other apart and rebuilt something stronger from the pieces. 2 rulers who had learned that power without accountability is tyranny, but accountability without power is meaningless. And above them, the moon shone down on the 7 dominions with the same light that had witnessed Eleanor's humiliation in Ashthorn so many years before. The Barren Omega the world discarded had become the most powerful woman in the Empire, not through conquest, through survival, through refusing to break even when breaking felt inevitable. And beside her stood Lucien Draven, the Alpha King who had finally learned that the real price of a crown was not loneliness or sacrifice. It was the courage to be vulnerable, to admit you cannot carry the weight alone, to trust that shared burden is not weakness, but the only kind of strength that lasts. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was something messier, harder, more real. But it was theirs, and that made it worth every scar, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and pain and struggle. Because in the end, love is not about perfection. It is about persistence. About 2 imperfect people deciding that together is better than apart, and doing the work to make that choice meaningful every single day. And sometimes, that is enough.